He sent her a text that read, "Business is crazy today. I wish I could be with you," while his arm was wrapped around another woman right across the street from where his pregnant wife was standing. She saw everything. 7 months pregnant, carrying his child, she had spent weeks planning the most beautiful anniversary surprise of their marriage. And in one single moment on a crowded sidewalk, the life she thought she was living crumbled in front of her eyes. If that had been you, 7 months pregnant, flowers still on the table, his message still warm on your phone screen, what would you have done? Because Alina Moretti didn't scream. She didn't run across that street. She did something far more dangerous. She went quiet. And a quiet woman who has just discovered the truth is the most powerful force in any room. If this story already has your heart pounding, you are exactly where you are supposed to be. Hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss a story like this one, because the ones coming next will leave you absolutely speechless. Drop a like and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning, because to understand what Alina did next, you need to understand exactly who she was before that sidewalk changed everything. Alina Moretti was the kind of woman people underestimated in person and regretted underestimating later. She wasn't loud. She didn't fill a room by demanding attention. She filled it the way good food does, slowly, warmly, until you realized you didn't want to be anywhere else. She had her grandmother's dark eyes, her grandmother's stubbornness, and her grandmother's absolute refusal to let anyone take something from her without a fight. But Alina had learned early that a fight didn't always look like raised voices and broken dishes. Sometimes a fight looked like patience. Sometimes it looked like a woman who was 7 months pregnant, standing alone in a restaurant she had decorated with the photographs of her marriage, quietly taking every single one of those photographs back down off the wall. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. The morning of their second wedding anniversary, Alina woke up before Roman did. That wasn't unusual. Roman Vescari was many things: brilliant, ruthless, unnervingly calm in situations that would reduce most men to panic. But he was not a morning person. He slept the way powerful men always sleep, heavy and certain, as though even unconsciousness was something he controlled. Alina had spent 2 years learning the sounds of his sleep, the specific rhythm of his breathing that told her he was truly out. And she lay beside him that morning with her hand resting on her stomach, feeling their daughter move and thinking about the afternoon she had planned. She had been planning it for 3 weeks. Not because she needed to prove something, not because the marriage had been struggling, or at least not in ways she could name clearly. Roman had been distracted for months. She knew that. Disappearing for meetings that ran longer than they should, coming home smelling like cigarette smoke and the particular kind of tension that men in his world carried in their shoulders. She had asked him once, early in the year, whether everything was all right. He'd kissed her forehead and told her his father was pressuring him about a business arrangement and that she shouldn't worry. She had tried not to worry. The anniversary surprise was supposed to be her way of saying, "I see you. I know you're carrying something heavy. But look at what we built together. Look at what is coming. Look at this family we made." She had reserved the private dining room at Nonna Lucia's, the restaurant her grandmother had left her, the one with the old photographs on the walls and the menu that hadn't changed in 40 years because there was no reason to change what was already perfect. She had spoken to the chef herself, ordered Roman's exact favorites: the braised short rib, the handmade pappardelle, the chocolate semifreddo. He always claimed he didn't want, and then finished completely. She had spent an entire Tuesday afternoon going through boxes in the spare bedroom to find photographs from their first 2 years, their wedding day, a trip to the Amalfi Coast that Roman had taken her on for their first anniversary, the morning he had sat across from her in this very restaurant and asked her if she'd thought of any names yet, and she'd burst into happy tears before she could answer. She had them framed, all of them. 14 photographs arranged around the private dining room so that when Roman walked in, the first thing he would see was the evidence of everything good they had chosen together. And beside his plate, in a small velvet box, not a ring, not jewelry, she had placed a folded note and an ultrasound photograph. Their daughter's face, or the beginning of it, that curled in perfect shape that had made Alina cry in the sonogram room while the technician pretended not to notice. The note said, "Our greatest chapter is almost here." She had been planning to give it to him that evening, over dinner, in the restaurant that had belonged to her family for generations. She had thought it would be the kind of moment they would talk about for the rest of their lives. She had been right about that part, just not in the way she imagined. Roman left that morning before she finished her coffee. He kissed her on the top of her head, not her mouth, which she noticed but did not say, and told her he had a meeting downtown that couldn't wait. He'd be back by 6. He promised. She watched him button his jacket in the hallway mirror the way he always did, straightening the lapels with both hands, and she thought, not for the first time, that he was the most controlled person she had ever known. There was not a single thing about Roman Viscari that was accidental. She told herself that was a good quality in a husband. She spent the morning at the restaurant, arranging everything herself. She had offered to let the staff help, and then changed her mind and sent them out, because this was something she needed to do with her own hands. She hung the photographs carefully. She placed the candles. She folded the note herself, tucked the ultrasound gently inside the velvet box, and set it precisely to the left of Roman's wine glass, because she knew he would notice anything placed on the right before anything placed on the left. She had learned that in 2 years of watching him read restaurant menus. By 2 in the afternoon, everything was ready. She stood in the doorway of the private dining room and looked at what she had made and felt something expand in her chest. Pride. Love. That particular warmth of having done something quietly thoughtful for a person who mattered to you. She gave herself 1 more minute with it. Then she put on her coat, picked up her bag, and went out to collect the one final thing she hadn't yet picked up. A framed photograph from a studio she'd used for the restoration. A shot from their wedding day that she'd had specially reprinted. The one where Roman was looking at her instead of the camera, and you could see on his face everything he had never quite known how to say out loud. She was on the sidewalk. The afternoon was clear and cold, the kind of late autumn day that makes a city look like it's been washed clean. She was thinking about nothing in particular. Whether she should wear the green dress tonight or the navy one, whether she'd remembered to confirm the reservation with the chef, whether her daughter was going to be tall like Roman or small like her. And she was crossing the street in a crowd of people when she looked up and saw him. Roman, her husband. He was 40 yards away on the other side of the street, and he was not alone. Alina stopped walking. Someone bumped into her from behind, a muttered apology, a rush of cold air as the crowd parted around her like water around a stone. She didn't move. She stood completely still on the sidewalk with her hand automatically going to her stomach. That instinctive protective gesture that pregnant women make, the body's way of saying, "Hold on, something is happening." And she stared. The woman beside Roman was tall with dark hair that fell straight past her shoulders. She was wearing a long camel coat, and she was laughing at something Roman had said, her head tipping back slightly, the comfortable laugh of a person who has been in someone's company long enough to be completely at ease. Roman had his arm around her, not at the elbow, not at the small of her back in the polite proprietary way of a man walking with a business contact. His arm was around her shoulders, and his head was bent slightly toward hers, and they were walking slowly, not the purposeful stride of a man late to a meeting, but the unhurried pace of a man who had nowhere else he needed to be. Alina watched Roman reach up and touch the woman's face, just briefly, just a brush of his thumb along her cheekbone. The gesture of someone who has touched that face many times and is not thinking about the fact that they're doing it in public, in the middle of a city, in the middle of the afternoon, because they have simply forgotten to be careful. Alina felt the cold hit her all at once, the way it does when shock drops your body temperature, when the blood pulls away from the skin and pools somewhere deep and useless in the center of your chest. Her phone vibrated in her coat pocket. She looked down at it with the blind reflex of someone whose body keeps moving even when the mind has stopped. The screen lit up with Roman's name. A text message. "Business is crazy today. I wish I could be with you." She read it once. She read it again. She looked up. Roman was still across the street. The woman had turned toward him now, and he pulled her into an embrace, proper and slow, his chin resting against the top of her head, the way he rested his chin against Alina's when she stood on her toes to reach him. Alina stood on that sidewalk for a long time, long enough for the crowd to flow around her and reform, long enough for the cold to fully settle into her coat, into her skin, into whatever part of her had still believed, until this exact moment, that the man she married was only keeping things from her because his world was complicated. She did not cry. That would come later. She did not call out to him. That was never a real option. She put her phone back in her pocket without responding. She turned around. She walked back toward the restaurant with her hand still on her stomach, and she did not run, and she did not shake, And she did not allow herself to fall apart on a public sidewalk at 2 in the afternoon because she was Alina Moretti and she had her grandmother's blood in her veins, and her grandmother had survived things that made this look manageable. She told herself that the whole way back. The restaurant was quiet when she returned. The staff had gone home for the break before dinner service. The private dining room was exactly as she'd left it. The photographs, the candles, the velvet box beside the wine glass, all of it waiting in the particular silence of a room that had been prepared for something that was not going to happen the way it was supposed to. Alina stood in the doorway again, the same spot she'd stood in that afternoon when her chest had been full of warmth, and she looked at what she'd built. Then she walked in and began to take it apart. She took down the photographs one at a time. She folded them carefully. She was careful even now, even in this, because breaking things felt like giving something to the situation that it didn't deserve. She set the candles aside. She left the table and the chairs and the ultrasound photograph in its velvet box, because that she was not moving. That was hers. That had nothing to do with him anymore. And then she sat down at the anniversary table in the empty room and she cried. Not dramatically, not the way grief looks in films with heaving shoulders and gasping breaths. She cried the way women cry when they are trying not to, quietly, with her hand over her mouth, staring at the velvet box, thinking about the note inside it. Our greatest chapter is almost here. She had written that 4 days ago, at the kitchen table, while Roman was in the next room on a phone call she hadn't thought to question. She had spent 20 minutes getting the handwriting right because her hands kept shaking with happiness. She sat with that for a long time. Then she stopped crying, and she started thinking. Because Alina Moretti, 7 months pregnant, sitting alone in the restaurant her grandmother had left her, surrounded by the wreckage of an anniversary surprise that no one would ever see, was not, when she stopped being a wife for long enough to be something else entirely, a woman who cried for long. She thought about the past 3 months, the way Roman had moved through their apartment like a man carrying something heavy that he refused to put down. The calls he took in the study with the door closed when he had never closed that door before. The money. She thought about the money. The accounts she had access to through her inheritance. The ones she had always left to the family attorney to manage because Roman had told her she shouldn't have to worry about those things, that they were safe, that he was handling everything. She thought about a conversation she'd had with her attorney 6 weeks ago. A routine call about annual reporting. He had mentioned, briefly, something about a property transfer inquiry that he'd forwarded back to Roman's people, assuming it was something they'd initiated. She hadn't followed up. She hadn't thought to. She was thinking about it now. She picked up her phone. Not to text Roman back. Not yet. She called her attorney instead, and the woman who had spent the afternoon decorating a room with the photographs of her marriage became, in the quiet of that empty restaurant, something her husband had never fully seen and had catastrophically failed to account for. She became the person who wanted answers. Not because she was angry, though she was, in a way that lived below the anger, colder and more structural than anger. But because Alina had always understood, even in the best years of being married to a man like Roman Vescari, that the most dangerous thing she could do was stay in the dark. And the dark, she was beginning to realize, had been much larger than she knew. Her attorney answered on the second ring. "Marco," she said quietly, "I need you to pull everything, every account connected to my inheritance, every property filing from the last 6 months, every transfer inquiry you've received that you may not have followed up on." A pause on the other end. "Alina, is everything all right?" She looked at the velvet box on the table, at the ultrasound photograph of her daughter's face curled inside it, at the anniversary note in her own handwriting. "No," she said, "but it's going to be." She hung up. Outside, the city moved through the early evening the way it always did. Indifferent, continuous, already forgetting the woman who had stood frozen on a sidewalk 40 minutes ago with her hand on her stomach and her husband's lie still warm on her phone screen. Alina Moretti sat in her grandmother's restaurant and waited for the truth to find her. It was already on its way. Marco Vitelli had been Alina's family attorney for 11 years. He had handled her grandmother's estate, the restaurant transfer, the property filings, the quiet paperwork that keeps a family's legacy intact across generations. He was 63 years old, soft-spoken, and had the particular stillness of a man who had spent 4 decades listening to people tell him things they had never told anyone else. He did not rattle easily. He was rattled now. Alina heard it in the 2 seconds of silence after she finished telling him what she needed. Not the silence of a man thinking, the silence of a man deciding how much to say. Marco. Her voice was flat. Don't do that. Do what? Whatever you're doing right now. The pause. I need you to skip it. Another beat. Then he exhaled slowly through his nose, the way he always did when he was about to say something he would rather not say. Alina, some of these accounts, the ones tied to the Moretti property holdings, I haven't had direct access to review in about 4 months. There was a restructuring authorization filed in August. I assumed you and Roman had discussed it. The word assumed landed in her chest like something cold and flat. I never signed anything in August, Marco. Silence. I need you to find out what was signed, she said. And by whom? And I need it tonight. She hung up before he could answer. She sat very still in the empty dining room and pressed both hands flat on the table and breathed. In through her nose, out through her mouth, the way her midwife had taught her for labor. The slow, controlled management of pain that is too large to fight and too present to ignore. She was 7 months pregnant, and her hands were completely steady. That surprised her, briefly. Then it didn't. She had always been steadier when she was angry than when she was afraid. Fear made her shake. Anger made her precise. And what was moving through her now, beneath the grief and the cold shock that still sat in her sternum, like a stone, was something that felt less like anger and more like the particular clarity that comes when a person stops hoping they're wrong. She wasn't wrong. She had known it the moment she saw his hand on that woman's face. The question now was how deep it went. She picked up her phone and did something she had never done before in 2 years of marriage. She went into Roman's shared calendar. He had added her when she was first pregnant, so she could track his schedule around her appointments. And she started reading backward. Not the appointments themselves, the gaps between them. The 2-hour blocks marked simply as meeting with no location, no contact, no detail. The Friday afternoons that had gone dark 3 months ago. The Tuesday mornings he'd told her he was at the warehouse on the south side, and she'd believed him because she had always believed him, because she had decided when she married a man like Roman Vescari that she would either trust him completely or not at all. She had chosen completely. She was done choosing that. By the time she had scrolled back 8 weeks, she had counted 11 blocked periods that matched no meeting she had ever been told about. 11 times in 8 weeks. She sat with that number. Then she looked up Celeste Armano. It took her less than 4 minutes. She wasn't looking in places Roman would have thought to hide things. She wasn't touching his phone or his email. She was simply putting a name into the kind of search that any person can run. The public kind. The one that pulls up old newspaper mentions and society column photographs and archived articles that nobody thinks to scrub because they were written years ago when nobody imagined they would matter. Celeste Armano, 29 years old, daughter of Enzo Armano, formerly of the Armano family. A name that meant something specific in this city, a name that had been attached to a particular kind of business empire for 30 years before it contracted, quietly and not entirely voluntarily, about 5 years ago. Celeste had left the country shortly after her father's organization began pulling back. There were photographs of her from that period, charity events, a gallery opening, one travel feature in a magazine. She was beautiful in the specific way of women who know exactly how they look and have learned to use it without appearing to try. She had come back. Alina stared at Celeste Armano's face on her phone screen for a long moment. Then she put the phone face down on the table and pressed her fingertips against her closed eyes and tried to think clearly. The Armano family and the Vescari family had history, not the friendly kind. Roman had mentioned his father's old rivalries exactly twice in 2 years, both times dismissively, the way men in his world dismiss things they have already decided are beneath their concern. She had not pushed. She had not asked for details she knew she wasn't supposed to have. That was the arrangement she had accepted. She knew the broad shape of Roman's world. She kept her distance from the specific machinery of it, and in return she had a husband who was present and careful, and had never, until 3 months ago, given her a reason to feel like the distance between them was anything other than professional. 3 months ago. She thought about that. 3 months ago, Roman had started closing the study door. 3 months ago, Celeste Armano had presumably returned to this city. 3 months ago, something had shifted in the space between her and her husband. Subtle, deniable, The kind of shift you tell yourself is just stress, just the pregnancy, just the natural weight of a life that has grown complicated. 3 months ago, someone had filed a restructuring authorization on her family's accounts without her signature. Alina took her hands away from her eyes and sat up straight. The pieces were not fully assembled yet. She could feel the shape of something but not its edges. What she knew for certain, Roman had been meeting this woman regularly. What she suspected, it wasn't only personal. What she couldn't yet see, who had initiated what, and how far back it went, and whether her husband was the architect of something or simply a participant in it. She needed Marco to call her back. While she waited, she did something she hadn't done in years. She went to the back of the restaurant, to the small office that had been her grandmother's, with the old wooden desk and the filing cabinet that nobody had touched since the estate transfer. She had kept it locked out of sentiment more than practicality. She opened it now with the key she still carried on her ring. She had never taken it off. And she started looking through the files. Her grandmother, Lucia Moretti, had not been a careless woman. She had kept records the way a person keeps records when they have learned not to rely on anyone else to do it for them. Meticulously, in her own system, with notes in the margins in her tight handwriting that Alina had to lean close to read. Property deeds, lease agreements, vendor contracts going back 20 years, bank correspondence. And at the back of the third drawer in a manila envelope that had been sealed and labeled in her grandmother's hand, for Alina. Not before. Alina stared at it. She had never seen it before. She was certain of that. She would have remembered. She opened it. Inside were two things: a handwritten letter, 3 pages, and a separate document, a legal instrument, properly notarized, that Alina had to read twice before she understood what she was holding. Her grandmother had created a secondary trust, separate from the main estate. It covered 4 properties that Alina had known about only vaguely, buildings she thought were simply part of the restaurant group's holdings. But the trust had specific conditions attached to it, conditions her grandmother had written with a precision that suggested she had drafted them herself and then had a lawyer formalize what she'd already decided. The properties could not be transferred, sold, mortgaged, or restructured without Alina's direct, witnessed, in-person authorization. Not a proxy, not a power of attorney, not a husband's signature. Alina. Only Alina. Her grandmother had done this 6 months before she died, before Alina had even met Roman. She read the letter. It was not long. Lucia Moretti had not been a woman who used extra words, but 3 lines near the end made Alina sit back in the old wooden chair and press her hand over her mouth. Men in certain kinds of power always eventually look at what their wives own and begin calculating. I do not say this about any specific man. I say it because it has been true in every generation I have lived through. The restaurant is yours. The buildings are yours. Make sure you are the only one who can give them away. Her grandmother had written that to a granddaughter who was not yet married, who had not yet met Roman Viscari, who was not yet carrying a child in a marriage that was, in this moment, collapsing around her in real time. Alina sat in that office for a long time. Her phone rang. Marco. She picked up immediately. Tell me, she said. He told her. The restructuring authorization filed in August had been submitted through a corporate entity she didn't recognize, a shell company, Marco said carefully, that appeared to be connected to a holding group associated with Viscari family business interests. It had been filed with forged documentation that mimicked her signature. Mimicked it well enough that Marco's office had flagged it as unusual but not fraudulent. They had forwarded it to Roman's legal team for clarification. Roman's legal team had confirmed it. They confirmed a forgery, Alina said. They confirmed the filing, Marco said. Whether they knew it was forged, Marco, someone filed paperwork with my forged signature on it, sent it to my attorney's office, and Roman's legal team signed off on it. A long pause. Yes. Which properties? He told her those 2. 4 properties. The same 4 properties covered by her grandmother's secondary trust. The trust that required her in-person authorization for any transfer. Whoever had tried to move those properties had not known about the trust, or they had known and believed they could work around it before Alina found out. How long do we have before any of this becomes actionable? She asked. The way it's structured, they'd need you to either sign voluntarily or wait until after the birth, when certain guardianship provisions in the estate become relevant if something were to happen to you. He stopped himself. Alina, I don't want to alarm you, but the structure of this filing suggests someone has been looking very carefully at your estate documents. She understood what he was not saying directly. She understood it completely. File an emergency protective order on all 4 properties tonight, she said. And Marco, don't tell anyone you've spoken to me, not your staff, not your partners, no one. Of course. I'll call you in the morning. She hung up and sat in the dark of her grandmother's office, with the letter in her lap and the sound of her own breathing too loud in the quiet room. Someone had forged her signature. Someone had been studying her estate well enough to know exactly which assets to target. Someone had structured the theft to activate after the birth of her child. Roman had told her the financial conspiracy belonged to his father, but she didn't know that yet. That conversation hadn't happened yet. Roman was still across the city somewhere, with his arm around Celeste Armano, sending his wife text messages about how much he wished he could be with her. What Alina knew, sitting in that chair, was this. Whether Roman had designed this or inherited it or stumbled into it, the result was the same. Her family's legacy, the restaurant, the buildings, the trust her grandmother had built across 40 years of hard work, was being systematically dismantled around her while she was pregnant and distracted and choosing every single day to believe the man she loved. She had been so careful not to be the suspicious wife. She had been so careful not to become the jealous, paranoid woman who interrogated her husband's calendar and searched his pockets and made his complicated life more complicated. She had prided herself on that. She had thought it was a form of strength. She understood now that it had been a form of blindness. A polite, voluntary blindness that she had chosen because it was easier than what she was currently sitting with. She stood up. She put the letter and the trust document back in the envelope and placed it in her coat pocket. She turned off the light in her grandmother's office. She walked back out into the restaurant, and she waited for her husband to arrive for their anniversary dinner. Roman came at 7:15. She heard him before she saw him, the particular weight of his footsteps, the sound of his car outside, the low exchange of words with the security detail he kept at a distance but never fully dismissed. Then the front door. Then his voice in the main restaurant, calling her name with the easy confidence of a man who expects to be answered. "Back here," she said. He came through the door of the private dining room and stopped. The room was almost completely bare, no flowers, no photographs, no candles. 1 table, 2 chairs, the velvet box. And arranged very carefully in the center of the table, 4 photographs that Alina had printed at the copy shop 2 blocks away while Marco was pulling records. Photographs she had taken on her phone from across that sidewalk, Roman's arm around Celeste Armano's shoulders, Roman's hand on Celeste Armano's face, Roman holding Celeste Armano in the middle of the afternoon while his pregnant wife stood 40 yards away and his text message sat unread on her phone screen. Roman looked at the photographs. He did not speak immediately. She watched him process what he was seeing, not the photographs themselves, but the architecture of the situation, the arrangement of the room, the absence of everything he had expected. She watched him understand that this was not a surprise that had gone wrong. This was a woman who had spent the afternoon collecting evidence while he thought she was home. She was wearing the anniversary dress, the green one. He had told her once, early in their marriage, that it was his favorite. She was wearing it because she wanted him to know, when he walked in here and saw what she had done, that she had dressed for the evening she had planned, that she had still been the woman who loved him when she drove to that copy shop, that everything he was looking at had been built not out of spite, but out of the ruins of something she had genuinely wanted. "Alina," he started. "How long?" she said. Not a question. The 2 words of a person who has already moved past needing it to be a question. He looked at the photographs again. She watched something pass across his face. She had spent 2 years learning his face, the specific geography of it, the tells he thought he'd eliminated and hadn't quite. And what she saw was not guilt, exactly. It was something more complicated than guilt. It was the expression of a man who had been running 2 separate realities and has just watched one of them walk through the door of the other. "She came back 4 months ago," he said finally. "That's not an answer. It started before that, before you and I—" He stopped. "No, that's not— It was over before we met. What happened 4 months ago was different. Was it? It was a mistake." He said it with the flatness of a man who has rehearsed the word and found it inadequate, and is saying it anyway because there is nothing better. It was a mistake I made because I was under pressure I hadn't told you about, and I handled it badly, and I'm not going to stand here and tell you it was anything other than what it was. You texted me, Alina said, while you were standing with her. You texted me that you wished you could be with me. He flinched. It was small. She almost missed it, but she'd spent 2 years learning his face. I know, he said. You looked right at her, and you typed that sentence, and you sent it. I know. I was 40 yards away, Roman. He closed his eyes. I know. She let that sit between them for a moment. The restaurant was completely silent. Somewhere in the building, a refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car passed. The sounds of a city that did not care about any of this. Sit down, she said. He sat. She remained standing. Now tell me about the properties. The shift in his expression was immediate and total. The guilt, the rehearsed apology, the controlled management of a man confessing an affair, all of it vanished, replaced by something sharper and more alarmed. He looked at her the way he sometimes looked at people in meetings when they said something he hadn't anticipated from them, a rapid recalculation, a sudden reassessment. What properties, he said. It wasn't a question either. The 4 Moretti properties, the restructuring authorization filed in August through a shell company I had never heard of before tonight, with my signature on it. She placed her hands flat on the table and leaned forward slightly. My forged signature. Roman was very still. Your attorney's office flagged it, he said quietly, and your legal team confirmed it. They were told to. By whom? He looked at her for a long moment, then he said quietly, My father. She straightened up. Your father forged my signature. He had it done. I don't know who specifically. Roman. Her voice was very level, very quiet. The quietness of a woman who is using all of her available energy to remain precise. Did you know? And there it was, the question, the only one that actually mattered. Because the affair was a wound she might, in some imagined future, have found a way to survive. People survived betrayals. People rebuilt. She had watched her mother survive worse and still get up every morning and make coffee and laugh at stupid things on television and go on living. Betrayal was survivable. But if he had known about the properties, if he had known about the forgery, if he had sat across from her at breakfast and kissed her forehead and told her not to worry while his father's lawyers were dismantling her inheritance. I found out 6 weeks ago, Roman said. She stared at him. My father told me what he'd done. He told me he'd already initiated the filing. He told me it was for the good of the family, for a new alliance he was building, that your properties were being used as collateral, and that, after the baby was born, there would be a restructuring of how the Vescari assets were organized, and your holdings would be formally absorbed into— Absorbed, Alina repeated. I told him no. Roman's voice had changed. It was harder now, stripped of the careful management he usually applied to everything. I told him to reverse it. We had 3 weeks of— He stopped, pressed his fingers against his forehead. It became a war between him and me. He's been using Celeste to put pressure on me because her father's organization still has connections my father needs, and Celeste and I— He stopped again. My father knew about our history. He used it. He brought her back to this city specifically to put her in front of me, and he was right that I would— He looked at the photographs on the table. He was right. Alina listened to all of this without moving. When he finished, the silence in the room was enormous. So your father forged my signature to steal my inheritance, she said, and used your former lover to keep you distracted and compliant. And you found out 6 weeks ago, and you didn't tell me. I was trying to fix it before you found out. You were trying to fix it before I found out. She repeated it slowly, not mockingly, just precisely. I am 7 months pregnant. Someone forged my legal documents. Someone has been planning to strip me of my family's assets after I give birth. And you were trying to fix it quietly. I thought I could— You thought you could handle it, without telling me. She picked up the velvet box from the table. She opened it. She took out the folded note and the ultrasound photograph, and she set them both on the table between them, face up. I planned this for 3 weeks, she said. I was here this afternoon with flowers and photographs and this. A note I wrote for you. About our daughter. About the life I thought we were building. Her voice didn't break. It was something harder than breaking. And you were walking through the city with your hands on a woman your father brought back specifically to compromise you, while his lawyers had my grandmother's signature on documents she never signed. Roman looked at the ultrasound photograph for a long time. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. She noticed it. She felt something pull in her chest at the sight of it. That involuntary, treacherous tenderness that does not ask permission and does not care that you are furious, and does not care that the person in front of you has destroyed the version of your life you were living this morning. And she took a deliberate step back from the table. "I didn't plan to destroy you," he said. "I need you to know that." "I believe you," she said. "You didn't plan it. You just let it happen." She looked at him. "You let your father move against me, and you let his weapon back into your bed, and you sent me text messages about how much you wished you could be with me, and you were going to fix it all quietly before I noticed." She tilted her head slightly. "That's not a plan to destroy me, Roman. That's something worse. That's me not mattering enough to tell the truth to." He stood up. "That's not—" The windows exploded. Not one, 3 of them, in rapid succession. The distinctive sharp percussion of gunfire that Alina had never heard in person before tonight, but recognized immediately in the way that the body recognizes danger before the mind has time to name it. Glass came inward in a cascade. She dropped behind the table, not a decision, a reflex, and hit the floor on her hands and knees, her whole body curling automatically, protectively, around her stomach. Roman was already moving. She heard him shout something, not to her, into his phone, the clipped hard language of a man issuing orders. And then he was on the floor beside her, his body between her and the direction the shots had come from, his hand on her back. "Don't move," he said. Not gently. The voice of someone who has been in rooms like this before and is running a protocol. "Stay down and don't move." "Roman, he knows you know," Roman said. His voice was completely flat. "My father. Someone told him tonight. He knows you called your attorney." Alina lay on the floor of her grandmother's restaurant with glass around her and her husband's body over hers and the ultrasound photograph on the table above them, and she thought, with a clarity that should not have been possible in this moment but was, Vittorio Vescari just made the biggest mistake of his life, because he had sent men with guns. And Alina had already sent something else. She had sent the documents. Before the dinner, before Roman arrived. While she was sitting in her grandmother's office with the trust in her lap and Marco's voice in her ear telling her about forged signatures and shell companies, she had made a second call. Not to the police. To her family attorney's investigative contact, a woman named Dana Reyes, who worked financial crimes and had been waiting for 3 years for someone inside the Vescari financial structure to hand her something usable. Alina had handed her everything. The files were gone. The evidence had already left the building. Whatever Vittorio Vescari was trying to stop tonight had already happened, and the men he had sent through those windows were too late. Alina pressed her face against the floor and breathed. In through her nose, out through her mouth, slow and controlled, while her husband covered her body with his and shouted orders into his phone, and she thought about her grandmother's letter, the 3 pages in her coat pocket, and the line that she kept coming back to. Make sure you are the only one who can give them away. She hadn't given anything away, but Vittorio Vescari had just given her everything she needed. The shooting stopped after 40 seconds. Alina knew this because she counted. She had pressed her face against the cold floor of her grandmother's restaurant, and she had counted the seconds the way her midwife had taught her to count through contractions. Not because the technique applied here, but because her mind needed something to hold on to, something measurable and finite, and counting was the only thing available. 1, 2, 3. Roman's body was heavy over hers, not crushing, deliberate. He had positioned himself with the practiced efficiency of a man who has done this before, his shoulder angled to cover her head, his left arm braced against the floor so his full weight wasn't on her stomach, his right hand still holding the phone against his ear, even as glass settled around them, and the echo of the shots dissolved into the ordinary sounds of the city outside. 40 seconds. Then silence. Roman spoke into the phone first. Status. A pause. How many? Another pause. His jaw tightened. Lock the perimeter. Nobody moves until I say. He pulled the phone from his ear and looked down at her. Can you move? Yes. Are you hurt? She did a rapid internal inventory. Her knees had hit the floor hard. Her palms were scraped from catching herself on the tile. Her heart was doing something violent and irregular in her chest. None of that was what he was asking. The baby's fine, she said. Something moved across his face at that. Relief so raw it looked almost painful. And then it was gone, packed back behind the controlled surface he wore in situations like this. He helped her up carefully, one hand under her arm, steadying her as she got her feet under her. She was shaking. She hadn't realized it until she was upright and could feel her own legs trembling in a fine, continuous vibration that had nothing to do with cold. She pressed her back against the wall away from the broken windows and looked at the room. The table had been knocked sideways when they dropped. The velvet box was on the floor. The photographs of Roman with Celeste had skated off the edge of the table and landed face up on the tile, one of them partially covered in broken glass. The ultrasound photograph was still on the table, somehow undisturbed, the small gray image of their daughter's face looking up at the ceiling of a room that had just been shot through. Alina looked at it for exactly 1 second, then she looked away. He sent 3 men, Roman said. He wasn't looking at the windows. He was looking at his phone, reading something. My people have 2 of them. The third got out. Your people, Alina said. The security detail outside, He stopped. I always have someone on the building when you're here alone at night. I've done it for 2 years. You didn't know because I didn't want you to worry. She absorbed that. Did the third man get a look at me? Probably. Then your father knows I'm alive. Yes. And he knows you were in here with me. Roman's expression shifted. She watched him work through the same calculation she was already running. If Vittorio had sent men tonight, it meant he believed the situation had escalated beyond what Roman could manage quietly. It meant he had decided Alina was a problem that needed to be resolved before she could do anything with what she knew. And the fact that the men had come tonight, within hours of Alina calling Marco, within hours of the documents being filed, meant that someone inside Marco's office, or inside the investigative contacts network, or inside the wall of people Alina had trusted tonight, had made a phone call they shouldn't have. Someone told him I called Marco, she said, or someone told him about Dana Reyes. She went very still. How do you know that name? Roman looked at her steadily. Because my father mentioned her 8 months ago. He said she'd been building a case against Viscari Financial Operations for 3 years and that she had a contact inside one of our holding companies. He paused. I didn't know the contact was your attorney's office. Is she compromised? I don't know. Roman. She said his name the way she said it when she needed him to stop managing his answer and give her the real one. Is Dana Reyes compromised? I don't know, he said again, and she believed him, which was almost worse than if he'd been lying. But my father does know her name, and if he knows you contacted her tonight, then the evidence she has isn't safe. Not if he gets to her first. Alina pushed off the wall. She picked up her phone from the floor where it had fallen and called Dana Reyes directly. 4 rings. 5. Voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. She looked at Roman. He was already on his own phone, speaking quietly and rapidly in the clipped, coded language of a man reorganizing the pieces on a board that has just been flipped. She listened to enough of it to understand he was pulling people toward Dana Reyes's location. An office downtown, 12 blocks from here. The building Alina had sent the documents to approximately 3 hours ago. 3 hours. She thought about what 3 hours meant in Vittorio Viscari's world. 3 hours was enough time to be told about a problem, to make a decision about it, and to send people to address it. 3 hours was precisely the window that had elapsed between Alina's call to Marco and the gunshots through the restaurant windows. Her phone rang in her hand. Unknown number. She answered it. Mrs. Viscari. A woman's voice, professional, careful. This is Dana Reyes. I'm calling from a different line because my office line may be monitored. Are you somewhere safe? Relatively, Alina said. Are you? I'm not at the office. I left about an hour ago. Something felt wrong. I can't explain it better than that. I've been doing this long enough to know when a building feels wrong. A brief pause. The documents you sent me are secure. I transferred them off-site as soon as they came in. But Alina, and I need you to hear this carefully, what you sent me is bigger than I expected. Alina moved toward the back of the restaurant, away from Roman and his phone call, lowering her voice. How much bigger? The restructuring authorization on your properties is the small piece. The filing itself is almost a distraction. What it points to, the shell company it's routed through, That entity has been used in 11 other transactions over the past 4 years. We're not talking about your 4 properties, Alina. We're talking about a pattern of asset acquisition that crosses 3 jurisdictions and involves money that should not be in legitimate circulation. Alina pressed her fingers against the bridge of her nose. Laundering. On a scale that I have been trying to document for 3 years. Your grandmother's properties weren't being stolen because they're valuable on their own. They were being positioned as clean assets, legitimately inherited, with clear title, with no criminal history attached, to anchor a larger restructuring of funds that have nowhere else to go. Dana's voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, a controlled urgency. Your inheritance was going to be used to launder approximately $60 million over the next 18 months. The number sat in the air between the phone and Alina's ear, and she stood very still with it. 60 million, her grandmother's restaurant. The 4 buildings her grandmother had acquired over 40 years of careful, exhausting, legitimate work. The legacy of a woman who had come to this country with nothing and built something real with her hands and her stubbornness and her absolute refusal to take anything she hadn't earned. It was going to be used to clean $60 million of money that had passed through violence and exploitation and whatever else a family like the Viscaras needed to move. Who knows you have this? Alina asked. My investigative partner and one federal contact I trust completely. That's it. I kept the circle as tight as I could. A pause. But Alina, there's something else. Something in the documents you sent that I need to ask you about directly. Ask. The secondary authorization, the one that activates after the birth of your child. Dana paused. There's a clause in the estate restructuring that transfers management authority of the Moretti holdings to a designated trustee in the event that you are, and I'm quoting the document, unable to exercise oversight due to medical incapacitation or legal determination of incapacity. Alina's hand tightened on the phone. They weren't just waiting for me to give birth, she said. No. They needed you either to sign voluntarily or to be declared incapacitated, or… Dana stopped. Or to not be here at all, Alina finished. A silence that confirmed it without requiring either of them to say it any more plainly than that. Alina stood in the back hallway of her grandmother's restaurant, with glass still crunching faintly under her shoes and the smell of cold air coming through the broken windows in the dining room, and she understood completely, for the first time, the full shape of what had been built around her. The affair had been a tool. Celeste Armano, brought back to the city to keep Roman's attention divided and his judgment compromised. The financial forgery, designed to move assets before Alina could notice. The birth, used as a timeline, because a woman 8 months pregnant is distracted, exhausted, focused inward, less likely to be scrutinizing account filings. And beneath all of it, a contingency. An escape hatch for the plan in case she did notice, in case she did push back. A clause designed to remove her from the equation entirely. The gunshots tonight were not a panic response. They were the contingency being activated. Dana, she said, I need you to move fast. I'm already moving. Whatever you need from me, any additional documentation, any testimony, I'll give it to you, everything. But I need you to understand that the people who fired through the windows of this restaurant tonight are the same people those documents describe. This is not a financial crimes case that exists separately from physical danger. They're the same case. I understand that, Dana said. I've understood that for 3 years. That's why I've been building it carefully. A brief pause. Are you and the baby physically okay? Yes. Roman Viscari is with you? Yes. Another pause, longer this time. Alina, I have to ask you something and I need an honest answer. Go ahead. Is he part of this? The original plan, the forgery, the asset restructuring. Is Roman Viscari the architect of any of it? Alina looked back toward the dining room. Through the doorway, she could see Roman still on his phone, pacing the narrow strip of floor between the overturned table and the wall, his back to her. She watched the set of his shoulders, the tension in them, the particular posture of a man who is trying to undo something. I don't think so, she said, but I don't know that for certain, and I can't be certain tonight. That's an honest answer, Dana said. It's the right answer to give me. What do I do right now? Get somewhere that Vittorio Viscari's people don't know about. Don't go home. Don't go anywhere Roman normally takes you. Find a place that exists only in your world, not his. After she hung up, she stood in the hallway for a moment with her eyes closed. In through her nose, out through her mouth. Then she opened her eyes and walked back into the dining room. Roman looked up when she came in. He'd righted the table. He'd picked up the ultrasound photograph and placed it back carefully on the surface. She noticed that. She didn't know what to do with it. My father has 3 properties he uses for situations like this, he said. Places his men don't have access to. I can get you to... No, she said. He stopped. I'm not going anywhere your father knows about. I'm not going anywhere your organization has a record of. She picked up her coat from the floor and put it on. Her grandmother's letter was still in the pocket. She checked for it automatically, the way you check for a passport when you're about to go through a door you might not come back through easily. Still there. I'm going somewhere you don't know about either. Roman's face changed, not with offense, with something more complicated. The recognition of a man who understands why he is being treated this way and cannot argue against it. You don't trust me, he said. I trust you more than I trusted you 2 hours ago, she said. That's not the same as trusting you completely. And right now, incomplete trust is a liability I can't afford. She looked at him steadily. If you are what you say you are, a man who made mistakes and is trying to fix them, then you will understand why I cannot take your word for that tonight of all nights. And if you're something else, then I definitely cannot. He looked at her for a long moment. The 3rd man who got away, he said finally. He will have reported back by now. My father knows you're alive and that the shooting failed. He'll move differently after this. He won't send men again. He'll try something else, something more controlled. He paused. Celeste. Alina looked at him. What about her? She's been his messenger, his pressure point. But she also knows things she wasn't supposed to retain. She knows the timeline, the specific accounts, the name of the trustee designated to take control of your assets. He stopped. She knows because I told her. The words landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Alina stared at him. You told her. 3 months ago, before I understood the full scope of what my father was doing. I thought I was explaining the pressure I was under. I thought... He stopped, pressed the back of his hand against his mouth for a moment. I told her about the filing. I told her your grandmother's properties were involved. I told her I was trying to get my father to stop. He looked at her. I told her because I trusted her. I trusted her before I understood that my father had brought her back specifically, so I would. Alina absorbed this. She absorbed it very slowly, the way you absorb something that changes the shape of everything else you thought you understood. Because if Roman had told Celeste, and Celeste was Vittorio's instrument, then Vittorio had known exactly how Roman planned to resist him, had known where the soft points were, had known that Roman was trying to quietly undo the forgery rather than exposing it, had known that Roman was choosing to protect Alina privately while publicly maintaining the appearance of a compliant son, had known that Roman was, at his core, still trying to hold the middle ground between his father's world and his wife's, and had correctly calculated that a man trying to hold the middle ground is a man who can be paralyzed. She played you, Alina said. Yes. And through you, she played me. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. She turned toward the door. I need to leave. Alina, I need to leave, Roman. Tonight has given your father everything he needs to know about where I am and what I know. The only thing I have left is what he doesn't know. She turned back. Does he know about my grandmother's secondary trust? The one that requires my in-person authorization? Roman frowned. What secondary trust? She looked at him. He was not performing confusion. She knew his face well enough to know that. He doesn't know, she said, partly to him and partly to herself. He forged my signature because he thought it was enough. He didn't know about the trust because my grandmother filed it separately and specifically so that it wouldn't be visible in the standard estate documents. She almost laughed. Not with humor, with something that was adjacent to it but harder. Your father did all of this, all of it, and the one thing that stops it from working is a piece of paper a 74-year-old woman wrote 6 months before she died because she didn't trust men with power. Roman was quiet. Alina, he said, I'm going to get my father for what he did. Not for me. I stopped caring about my position in his organization months ago, but for you, and for... He looked at her stomach. He stopped. Don't, she said quietly. Don't use her. Don't put her in the middle of what you're trying to say to me. Whatever you're going to do, you do it because it's right, not because it earns you something. He nodded, just once. Can I know where you're going? He asked. No. She walked out. The city outside the restaurant was cold and ordinary, the streets still moving with late evening traffic, people walking past without looking at the building with the shot-out windows, because in this part of the city, people had learned not to look too carefully at certain kinds of disturbances. A car pulled up. Not Roman's, not familiar. A car she had called herself from the back hallway, paid for with her own account, going to a place she had never taken Roman. Her mother's apartment, 3 miles away. An address that existed in no Vescari document, no Vescari calendar, no Vescari anything, because Alina's mother and Roman had met exactly 4 times and liked each other adequately, and maintained the polite distance of 2 people who share one important person and have agreed not to complicate that. She got in the car and gave the address and sat in the back seat with her hand on her stomach and her grandmother's letter in her coat pocket and tried to think about what came next. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize, and then she did recognize it. Donna Reyes on the secondary phone. My federal contact is ready to move. Need your formal statement. Tomorrow morning. Can you do it? She typed back, yes. Then a second message from Dana, 30 seconds later. One more thing. The trustee named in the restructuring document. The person designated to take control of your assets in the event of your incapacitation. Alina stared at the screen. It's not Vittorio Viscari. She kept reading. The designated trustee is Celeste Armano. The car moved through the city streets. The driver had the radio on low, something instrumental and unobtrusive. Outside, the lights blurred past in the way they do when you're sitting very still and the world is moving around you. Celeste Armano. Not Vittorio's organization absorbing her assets, not the Viscari empire expanding to swallow her inheritance. Celeste Armano specifically, personally, named as the trustee. The woman Roman had loved before Alina. The woman Vittorio had brought back to compromise his son. The woman who had been positioned, from the beginning, not merely as a distraction, but as a replacement. Alina thought about that word, replacement. She thought about the clause in the document, medical incapacitation or legal determination of incapacity, or not here at all. She thought about the way Celeste had laughed, tipping her head back, comfortable, in the middle of the afternoon. The way Roman's hand had gone to her face without thinking. The easy, practiced intimacy of 2 people who had never fully stopped. She thought about what Vittorio Viscari had actually built here. Not just a financial scheme, a succession plan. A world in which Alina Moretti died in childbirth, or disappeared, or was otherwise removed, and Roman's former love stepped into the space she left, carrying the legal authority over a legitimized property portfolio that would anchor $60 million of dirty money. And Roman had handed Celeste the information she needed to make it work. The car stopped in front of her mother's building. Alina sat in the back seat for a moment without moving. The driver glanced in the mirror. She didn't see him. She was thinking about the woman she had been this morning. The woman who had woken up before her husband and felt her daughter move and thought about the afternoon she had planned. The woman who had hung 14 photographs in a private dining room and folded a love note and placed it in a velvet box. That woman was gone. Not destroyed, not erased, but changed. The way material changes under enough heat, same substance, different structure, harder and less willing to flex. She got out of the car. Her mother was awake. Alina had called from the restaurant's back hallway, just a single sentence. I'm coming over. I'll explain when I get there. And she opened the door before Alina could knock. Rosa Moretti was 61 years old, small and sharp-eyed, with the same dark eyes as her daughter, and the particular expression of a woman who has been expecting bad news long enough that its arrival is almost a relief. She took one look at Alina and said, "Come inside." She didn't ask questions. She made tea. She sat across from her daughter at the small kitchen table and waited. Alina told her everything, not because she needed her mother to fix it, not because she needed to be comforted, but because Rosa Moretti had spent 30 years navigating a city that did not make things easy for women who refused to be managed. And she had done it without anyone's organization behind her and without anyone's money and without anyone's protection. And if Alina was going to survive the next 48 hours, she needed someone in the room who knew what that looked like. When she finished, her mother was quiet for a moment. She wrapped both hands around her teacup. She looked at the table. Then she said, "The trust document your grandmother left. Where is it?" Alina took the envelope from her coat pocket and set it on the table. Her mother looked at it. "You need to get it to Dana Reyes tonight." "I know." "And you need to give your formal statement tomorrow." "I know." "And you need to do both of those things before Vittorio Viscari finds out exactly what your grandmother put in that document, because the minute he understands that his forgery is nullified, and the only thing standing between him and $60 million is your signature on a document you will never sign, he will stop trying to use lawyers." Her mother looked up at her. "Do you understand what I'm saying?" "Yes," Alina said. Rosa Moretti nodded once. She reached across the table and put her hand over her daughter's hand and held it there for exactly 3 seconds, the compressed, efficient comfort of a woman who does not believe in lingering. And then she sat back. "Then we have work to do," she said. Alina looked at her mother across the small kitchen table, in the apartment that Roman had never been to, in the part of her life that had always been only hers, and she felt something shift and settle inside her. Not calm. Something more functional than calm. The particular internal alignment of a person who has run out of options that don't require them to become exactly as dangerous as the situation demands. She picked up her phone. She called Dana Reyes. "I have the trust document," she said when Dana answered. "And I have something else you need to know about Celeste Armano." Outside, the city went on doing what cities do. Unaware. Indifferent. Full of people sleeping through what was happening in a small kitchen 3 miles from a restaurant with shot-out windows and an ultrasound photograph still sitting on the table inside. Vittorio Viscari was somewhere in that city, recalibrating, deciding what to do with a pregnant woman who had refused to stay in the dark and had refused to fall on the floor of her grandmother's restaurant and had refused, at every single turn, to be the version of herself that made his plan work. He was going to decide that she needed to be handled more directly. And Alina Moretti, sitting at her mother's kitchen table with her grandmother's letter in her hand, and Dana Reyes on the phone, was already 3 steps ahead of. She was still on the phone with Dana Reyes when her mother put a cup of tea in front of her that she didn't drink. It was 11:47 at night. Alina knew this because she had looked at the clock on her mother's kitchen wall, an old ceramic thing shaped like a rooster that had hung in the same spot for 20 years, and thought, with the particular dissociation of extreme stress, that 12 hours ago, she had been asleep next to her husband, and the most complicated thing on her schedule was picking up a framed photograph from a restoration studio. 12 hours. "The trust document," Dana said through the phone. "Can you photograph every page and send it to me right now while we're talking?" "Yes." Alina pulled the envelope from her coat pocket and spread the pages on her mother's kitchen table under the overhead light. Her hands were still steady. She kept noticing that. She kept expecting them to shake, and they didn't. "Sending now." She photographed each page carefully, the notary stamp, the signature block, her grandmother's handwriting in the margins. 6 photographs. She sent them through the encrypted channel Dana had set up on the secondary phone. "Got them," Dana said. "Okay, this is Alina. This is airtight. Your grandmother had this drafted by a very careful attorney. The in-person requirement, the witness protocol, the specific anti-proxy language. Whoever she used knew what they were doing." A brief pause. "The forgery is completely nullified by this document. Any transfer attempted under the August filing is void on its face, which means Vittorio's entire financial structure falls apart. The part built on your assets, yes. The $60 million that was supposed to route through those 4 properties has nowhere clean to go. And with the documentation you've given me, combined with what my federal contact has been building for 3 years, we have enough to move." Dana's voice was careful, but there was a current running underneath it, the restrained energy of someone who has been waiting a long time for exactly this. "I'm talking to my contact at 6 a.m. We can have a formal action initiated by end of day tomorrow." "Celeste Armano," Alina said. "She's central to the conspiracy. Named trustee, documented communication with Vittorio, and if Roman Viscari is willing to provide a statement about what she told him, I don't know what Roman will do. Can you find out?" Alina looked at her mother across the table. Rosa was watching her with the still, attentive expression of a woman processing everything and saying nothing until she was asked. "I'll handle Roman," Alina said. She hung up. She sat for a moment in the specific exhaustion of a person who has been running on adrenaline for 6 hours and can feel the edge of it starting to fray. Her back ached. Her knees, where she'd hit the floor, had stiffened into a low, persistent throb. Her daughter had been quiet for the last 2 hours. Not worryingly so, she knew the difference, but the stillness of a baby who is sleeping while her mother burns through every reserve she has. "You need to sleep," her mother said. "I need Roman to give a statement." "You need to sleep first and then deal with Roman." Rosa stood and went to the small cabinet above the refrigerator and took down a bottle of water and set it in front of Alina with the quiet authority of a woman who has decided what is happening next. 2 hours, the couch. I'll wake you at 2. I can't. Alina. Her mother sat down again and looked at her directly, the way she had looked at her when she was a child and had decided to argue about something not worth arguing about. "You are 8 months pregnant. You have been shot at. You have discovered that your husband's father forged your legal documents and named your husband's former lover as the inheritor of your grandmother's life's work. You have done everything that can be done tonight." She paused. 2 hours. Then you call Roman. Alina opened her mouth, closed it. She went to the couch. She did not sleep, but she lay still in the dark of her mother's living room with her grandmother's letter on the coffee table beside her. And she let her body stop moving for 2 hours, which was the closest thing to rest available to her. And she thought about everything she knew and everything she still needed and what came next. She called Roman at 2:14 in the morning. He answered before the first ring finished. He had not been asleep either. "Are you safe?" First thing, no preamble. "Yes." "Roman, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer it without thinking about the answer first. Just say what's true." A beat. "Okay." "Celeste is the named trustee in the restructuring document. Not your father, her." She waited. "Did you know that?" The silence was long enough that she started to feel it in her chest. Then he said, "No." "You're certain?" "I was told the trustee was a corporate entity, a holding company my father controls. I never saw the specific document. My father kept the filing details through his own legal team, not mine. I was only told the structure in general terms." His voice was very tight. "Alina, if Celeste is the named trustee, she doesn't just benefit from your affair, she benefits from my death." Alina said it plainly because she needed to hear how it sounded out loud, and she needed him to hear it too, without softening. "That's the document your father had filed under my forged signature. A document that gives your former lover control of my family's inheritance if I am incapacitated or gone." Roman said nothing for a moment. She could hear him breathing. "Where is she right now?" Alina asked. "Celeste, do you know?" "She has a suite at the Carver Hotel, downtown. My father arranged it when she came back. Is she still there?" "She was 3 hours ago. My people had eyes on the hotel." "Roman, I need you to do something." She sat up on the couch. Her mother's living room was dark, except for the streetlight coming through the thin curtains. "I need you to bring her in, not to your father's people, not to anyone in your organization. I need you to find her and hold her somewhere your father doesn't have access to, and I need you to do it in the next 2 hours before Vittorio realizes what happened tonight didn't work and starts moving pieces." Another silence. Longer. "If I do that," Roman said slowly, "I am finished with my father's organization permanently. This where I take an action against Celeste without him knowing, and if he knows, I know what it costs you." "I don't think you do." "Roman," she kept her voice level, "he put a named trustee on a document that positions your unborn daughter's mother for removal. He brought a woman into your bed specifically to compromise you. He forged my signature on a legal instrument and then sent men through the windows of my grandmother's restaurant." She stopped. "I know what it costs you. I'm asking anyway, because you said you were going to fix this. This is what fixing it looks like." She heard him exhale, long and slow. "Give me 90 minutes, he said. He hung up. Alina set the phone down. She sat in the dark for a moment. Then she lay back down and stared at her mother's ceiling and felt her daughter shift once, a slow rolling movement that pressed briefly against her ribs, and she put her hand on her stomach and held it there. "I know," she said quietly. To no one. To her daughter, to the room. "I know." She didn't sleep, but she stayed still. At 4:10 in the morning, Roman texted her a single line. It's done. She's at a location my father doesn't know about. She's asking to talk. Alina got up. She put on her coat. She checked the envelope in her pocket. She went to her mother's bedroom door and knocked once, softly. Rosa opened it immediately. She had also not been sleeping. I have to go, Alina said. Her mother looked at her for a moment. Then she said, Take the car. Rosa Moretti drove a 10-year-old sedan that Roman had never ridden in and his people had never followed, and which existed in no record connected to the Viscari name. Alina took the keys. She drove across the city in the dark. The address Roman had sent was a building in the northeast part of the city. A commercial property, ground floor, the kind of anonymous brick structure that exists in every city and is noticed by no one. Roman was outside when she arrived, standing in the cold without his jacket, which she noticed because it was the first time in 2 years she had seen him outside in cold weather without one. It was a small thing. It told her more than she expected. He looked at her when she got out of the car. He looked at her stomach. He looked at her face. She's inside, he said. She's not restrained. She's not... I didn't hurt her. She came voluntarily once she understood the situation. What situation did you describe? That my father had just sent men to kill my pregnant wife, and that I am no longer operating within his framework, and that she needs to decide very quickly which version of the next 24 hours she wants to be part of. Alina looked at him. That was effective. She's scared, Roman said. She's been scared for a while, I think. She got in deeper than she planned to, and my father is not a man who lets people walk away from that cleanly. Is that supposed to make me sympathetic? No. He held the door open. It's supposed to give you leverage. Alina walked inside. The space was a large empty room, former warehouse floor, bare concrete, a few folding chairs that Roman's people had evidently produced from somewhere. 2 of his men stood near the far wall, still and attentive, the particular posture of men who have been told to be present but not involved. One overhead light, cold air that the building's heat was fighting and losing against. Celeste Armano was sitting in one of the folding chairs. Up close, she was different from the woman Alina had watched from across the street. The carelessness was gone. That easy, performative confidence had been replaced by something more stripped down. She was still beautiful. That didn't go away because you were scared, but she was sitting with her hands folded between her knees and her shoulders slightly hunched. And when Alina came through the door, she watched her the way a person watches someone they have wronged and are now afraid of. Alina pulled a chair and set it directly in front of her, sat down, put her coat in her lap. They looked at each other for a moment. You know who I am, Alina said. Not a question. Yes. Celeste's voice was quieter than Alina expected. Controlled, but barely. I've known since before we met. We haven't met. I've known who you are, Celeste said, since before Roman told me about you. Vittorio told me who you were. He told me about the restaurant, the inheritance, the properties. He told me what they were worth and what he needed them for. She paused. He told me before he brought me back to this city. Alina kept her face still. So you came back knowing exactly what the plan was. I came back because my father's organization is in debt to Vittorio Viscari for approximately $8 million, and Vittorio made it very clear that my returning here was the mechanism by which that debt would be forgiven. Celeste's voice was flat. Not an excuse, a recitation. My father has no money left. What he has left is me. And Vittorio wanted you to distract Roman while he moved against my assets, and to communicate information back to him. Roman trusted me with things he shouldn't have. I passed them to Vittorio. She looked at her hands. I'm not going to tell you I didn't know what I was doing. I knew. Did you know about the trustee designation? A pause. Yes. Did you know about the contingency clause? Celeste looked up at her. Which one? Alina felt something cold move through her. How many contingency clauses are there? Celeste looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked past Alina toward Roman, who had come through the door behind her and was standing near the wall. Something passed between them. Not warmth, not the remnant of intimacy, but the complicated acknowledgement of 2 people who know too many of each other's secrets. There's a second document, Celeste said. Vittorio had it prepared as a backup. If the August filing was challenged, if you found the forgery, There's a secondary instrument that restructures the properties through a different entity. One that doesn't require your signature at all because it's routed through a marital estate provision that would activate if Roman formally... She stopped. If Roman formally what? Alina said. Celeste looked at her. If Roman formally initiated a legal separation before the birth of the child, she said, under the marital estate provision, a separation filing during the pregnancy would trigger a temporary administrative hold on jointly accessible assets, including assets you hold individually that have been commingled with marital finances. During that hold, Vittorio's holding company could execute the transfer before you could contest it. Alina sat very still. He needed Roman to leave me, she said slowly, before the baby is born. Or appear to, a separation filing. It doesn't have to be permanent, just filed, just enough to create the legal window. Alina turned around and looked at Roman. His face was the color of concrete. He was staring at Celeste with an expression that she had never seen on him before. Not anger, or not only anger, but something underneath it that looked like the specific devastation of a man who has just understood that the full depth of a trap was wider than he measured. "Did you know?" Alina said to him. "No." The word came out hoarse. "No, I did not know about a second document. But your father had you positioned to file a separation. All those meetings, all that pressure. Was he pushing you toward... He told me 3 weeks ago that the marriage wasn't working. He told me I should consider my options." Roman's voice was tight and getting tighter. "I told him to go to hell. I thought it was about control. I thought he was trying to separate me from you emotionally so I would stop pushing back against the financial plan." He stopped. "I didn't know a separation filing was the mechanism. Could he have forced it? He could have filed on my behalf through a..." Roman stopped, looked at her. "Through a power of attorney provision in the Vescari family trust that I signed when I was 22 years old and never thought to revoke." The room was very quiet. Alina turned back to Celeste. "The second document. Where is it? Vittorio's attorneys have the original, but I have a copy." She reached into the inside pocket of her jacket. One of Roman's men moved immediately, a single sharp step forward. Celeste froze. "It's paper," she said carefully. "Just paper." The man looked at Roman. Roman nodded once. Celeste slowly withdrew a folded document and held it out. Alina took it. She read it. All of it. It took 4 minutes, and the room stayed completely silent while she read. The only sound, the distant traffic outside and the building's heating system cycling on and off. When she finished, she folded it again along the original creases and held it in her lap. The second document was worse than the first. More sophisticated, more layered, with provisions she would not have understood 6 months ago, but understood now, because she had spent the last 8 hours becoming fluent in the language of her own destruction. It named Celeste as trustee here too, but under a different mechanism. Not inheritance, not incapacitation, but a marital estate administration provision that would give the trustee authority within 72 hours of a separation filing. 72 hours. 3 days to transfer $60 million worth of cleaned assets before any court challenge could be mounted. "Why are you giving me this?" Alina asked. Celeste looked at her. Her hands were still folded between her knees. Her knuckles, Alina noticed, were white. "Because Vittorio Vescari told me 3 days ago that after the transfer was complete, my usefulness would be finished," she said. He used that word, finished. She paused. "I have spent 4 months believing I was a necessary piece of this plan. 3 days ago I understood that I am a temporary one." "You're scared he'll remove you the same way he planned to remove me." "He doesn't leave loose ends," Celeste said. "I know enough to be one." Alina looked at her for a long time. She looked at this woman who had come back to a city to do a job she'd been coerced into, who had slept with someone else's husband while that wife was pregnant, who had fed information to a man who had used it to build a mechanism designed to strip a pregnant woman of her family's legacy and potentially her life. She looked at her and tried to locate sympathy and found something more complicated. Not forgiveness, nothing close to it, but a cold, pragmatic recognition that Celeste Armano, scared and cornered, was more useful than Celeste Armano calculating. "You'll testify," Alina said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "About everything. The plan, the documents, the communications with Vittorio, the trustee designation, the second instrument, all of it." "Yes." And you'll do it on the record. Formal statement. Federal investigators. Celeste nodded. Alina stood up. She looked at Roman. Call Dana Reyes. Give her this address. Tell her we have a witness who is prepared to give a full statement, and we need her here within the hour. Roman looked at her. She could see him processing the architecture of what she had just built. Not because she'd asked his permission, but because she had walked into this room and dismantled the situation, the same way she had taken down the photographs in the restaurant, methodically, without theatrics, one piece at a time. He made the call. Dana Reyes arrived at 5:40 in the morning with her federal contact, a compact woman named Agent Torres, who shook Alina's hand with the brisk efficiency of someone who has been awake for 20 hours and is used to it. She looked at the second document for less than 30 seconds before she looked at Dana and said, "This is enough." "It's enough combined with everything else," Dana confirmed. "I want a protection arrangement for Ms. Armano," Alina said to Agent Torres. "Whatever she needs to feel safe enough to testify. She came forward voluntarily and she's been coerced throughout this situation. I'm not asking you to treat her as a primary victim. I'm asking you to make it possible for her to be useful." Agent Torres looked at her with the particular measuring expression of someone recalibrating who they're dealing with. "You're advocating for the woman who had an affair with your husband." "I'm advocating for the most efficient path to Vittorio Viscari," Alina said. "There's a difference." Torres almost smiled. "Not quite. We can arrange something." The formal statement process took 2 hours. Alina sat in a folding chair against the wall and watched Celeste Armano answer questions in the flat, detailed way of someone who has decided that precision is the only currency she has left. Roman stood near the door. He did not speak unless directly addressed. Alina watched him from across the room. The stillness he maintained, the way he occasionally looked at her with an expression she didn't have a name for, and she thought about how 12 hours ago she had been wearing this dress for an anniversary dinner, and she had thought the green was his favorite, and she had wanted to give him a photograph of their daughter's face. She was still wearing the dress. She hadn't had time to change. At 7:50 in the morning, Agent Torres stepped outside to make a call. She came back 3 minutes later with the specific expression of someone delivering information they have been waiting to deliver for a long time. "We have movement," Torres said. Vittorio Viscari arrived at his attorney's office at 7:15. Based on the timing, he's attempting to execute the secondary instrument, the marital estate provision. She looked at Roman. "He filed a separation notice on your behalf through the family trust power of attorney at 6:42 this morning." The room went very quiet. Alina looked at Roman. He looked at her. "He filed," Roman said, his voice stripped of everything. "Without my knowledge. Under the power of attorney, I didn't revoke." "The 72-hour window starts when the filing is registered," Torres said. "It's being registered right now." Dana was already on her phone. "I'm filing the emergency injunction, the trust document, the forgery evidence, the witness statement. If I can get the injunction in front of a judge in the next 2 hours, it freezes any asset transfer during the contest period." She looked at Alina. "I need you at the courthouse." "When?" "Now." Alina stood up. She picked up her coat. She looked at Roman. I was standing with both hands pressed flat against the wall behind him, his eyes closed, and she watched him deal with what his father had just done. Not to her, though that was enormous, but the specific act of using Roman's own legal signature, the trust document he'd signed at 22, to file a separation from his pregnant wife without his knowledge or consent, using Roman as the instrument of Alina's destruction. She walked toward the door. "Alina," Roman's voice. She stopped but didn't turn. "I'm coming with you," he said. "You don't need to." "I know I don't need to." His voice was rough, not breaking, just rough. "I'm coming with you." She turned around and looked at him. He was standing straight now, away from the wall, and his face had resolved into something she recognized. Not the careful management he usually wore, not the controlled surface, but something below that, stripped of the layers. She looked at him for a long moment. "You keep up," she said. "I'm not waiting." She went out the door. The courthouse was a 20-minute drive that took 12 because Roman's driver pushed through traffic with the focused aggression of someone who had been given a clear directive and a deadline. Alina sat in the back seat with the documents in her lap, and Dana on the phone beside her and Agent Torres in the front seat, speaking in terse intervals into her own radio. And Roman sat on Alina's other side and did not touch her, and did not speak unless spoken to, and she was aware of him with the particular heightened awareness of extreme stress. The city was waking up around them. 7:55 in the morning, people going to work, coffee shops opening. The ordinary machinery of a day that did not know it was the day that Vittorio Vescari's empire began to end. The emergency injunction hearing was not a courtroom scene. It was a judge's chambers, a woman in her 60s named Judge Adelman, who had the expression of someone accustomed to people bringing her complicated things at inconvenient hours, and who read every document she was handed with the unhurried thoroughness of a person who understood that speed and precision are not mutually exclusive. She read. She asked 3 questions. Dana answered 2 of them. Alina answered 1. The judge signed the injunction at 9:17. The asset freeze was in place. Any attempt to transfer the Moretti properties under the marital estate provision or any other instrument was now legally suspended pending full adjudication. The 72-hour window Vittorio had opened at 6:42 that morning had been nailed shut. Dana grabbed Alina's arm briefly. Not an embrace, a single moment of contact between 2 women who have just done something together that neither of them will fully process until much later. And then she was on the phone again, moving fast, coordinating with Torres and her federal contact. Alina stood in the hallway outside the judge's chambers and leaned against the wall and breathed. In through her nose, out through her mouth, the way she'd been breathing since last night. Roman came to stand beside her. Not close, just within speaking distance. It's done, she said. Not to him specifically, to the hallway. The injunction is, he said carefully, my father is still... Your father is next, she said. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered it. A man's voice. Older, deliberate. A voice she had never heard in person, but recognized immediately from the particular way Roman went rigid beside her when the first syllable came through the speaker. Vittorio Vescari, calling his daughter-in-law directly for the first time. You've been busy, Vittorio said. Alina's hand was steady on the phone. She did not look at Roman. She looked at the wall in front of her. Yes, she said. The injunction is a temporary measure. You understand that. My attorneys are already preparing the response. Your attorneys are working with documents that include my forged signature, she said. I'd be interested to see how they respond to that in front of a federal judge. A pause. You're a smart woman, Alina. I said that to Roman when he told me he wanted to marry you. I told him you were the kind of woman who notices things. He said that was one of the things he loved about you. A very brief pause. I should have listened to myself more carefully. What do you want? I want to meet. Alina felt Roman's hand close on her arm. Not grabbing, pressure. The pressure of a man who is about to say no for her. She moved her arm away from his hand. Just slightly. When? She said. Tonight. The restaurant. 6 o'clock. Another pause. Just you and me, Alina. No attorneys, no federal agents, no Roman. She could hear something in his voice that she tried to identify. Not desperation, not quite. Something more like the particular tone of a man who has run out of moves and is attempting to create the appearance of one more. Bring the trust document. We can discuss an arrangement. Alina looked at the wall. 6 o'clock, she said. She hung up. Roman was staring at her. You're not going. I'm going. He'll have people there. He'll have people anywhere he chooses to meet me. She turned to face him. I know the restaurant. I know every entrance, every exit, every storage room, every corner. My grandmother built that building. I spent my childhood in it. She held his gaze. He picked my ground. He doesn't know that. No, she said. He doesn't. She called Dana. She called Torres. She told them both about the call and what she planned to do, and she listened to both of them explain why it was inadvisable, and then she explained her reasoning, which came down to one thing. Vittorio Vescari calling her directly meant he was no longer operating from strength. He was improvising. And a man improvising made mistakes. Torres was quiet for a moment after she finished. Then she said, I can have people in position before 6. I know you can, Alina said. That's why I'm telling you. She spent the rest of this morning at Dana's office, going through the documentation, making sure every piece of evidence was correctly filed, correctly attributed, correctly protected. She signed her formal witness statement, She reviewed Celeste's statement and confirmed 3 points of corroboration between them. She ate half a sandwich that someone brought from a deli downstairs because her body demanded it, even though she had no appetite. And she drank 2 full glasses of water because Dana watched her drink the first one and then refilled it without being asked. At 2 in the afternoon, she went back to her mother's apartment. She showered. She changed clothes. She sat on the edge of her mother's bed for 20 minutes with her grandmother's letter in her hands and read it through one more time. The last paragraph. You will face things I cannot predict and cannot protect you from, because that is the nature of a life actually lived. What I can give you is the knowledge that the women in this family have always faced the worst things with their eyes open and their hands working. Not because we are fearless, because we are practical. Fear is a luxury. Work is what remains. She folded the letter. She put it back in the envelope. She put the envelope in her coat pocket. At 5:30, she drove her mother's car to the restaurant. She went in through the back. She walked through the kitchen, cold and dark, dinner service canceled for obvious reasons, and through to the dining room. The main windows had been boarded during the day, rough plywood that blocked the view of the street. The private dining room was as she'd left it after the shooting. The overturned table, the glass on the floor, the chairs pushed aside. She righted the table herself. She set 2 chairs facing each other, not across the table but at an angle, the way people sit when they are going to talk rather than perform. She went to the kitchen and made coffee. She stood at the kitchen counter and drank it while Torres's people quietly filtered into the building through the entrance she had shown them on a floor plan she'd drawn from memory at Dana's office. 6 people. She could hear them as a series of almost sounds, the nearly silent movement of professionals who are very good at not existing in a room until they need to. At 5:58, a car pulled up outside. She heard the door, then footsteps. Vittorio Vescari came through the dining room door at exactly 6 o'clock. I was 71 years old, shorter than she'd expected from photographs. She had only seen him twice in 2 years, briefly, at family functions where he had been gracious and distant and had shaken her hand with the particular warmth of a man who is performing warmth rather than feeling it. He was wearing a dark overcoat, and he carried nothing in his hands, which she noted. He looked at the plywood on the windows. He looked at the righted table and the 2 chairs. He looked at her. "You're alone," he said. Not a question. Looking. "I said I would be." He came in. He sat in one of the chairs. He did not unbutton his coat. He looked at her with the measuring assessment of a man who has spent 50 years reading rooms, and she sat across from him and looked back without looking away. "You brought the trust document," he said. "I have it. I'd like to see it. I'd like to understand what you're offering first." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "You're in a difficult position, Alina. The injunction is temporary. The legal process is long. You are 8 months pregnant. Whatever you believe you've built in the last 24 hours, the reality is that you're a woman in the middle of a situation that has been operating for decades. And the people on the other side of it have resources and patience that your attorney and her federal contact do not." "That sounds like a threat." "It's a description," he said. "I'm offering you clarity." "What's the offer, Vittorio?" He looked at her steadily. "Walk away from the investigation. All of it. Sign a voluntary release on the injunction. In exchange, the properties remain yours, legally, cleanly, in perpetuity. No transfer, no restructuring, no trustee. The August filing is formally withdrawn. You get everything your grandmother left you, untouched." He paused. "And you and my son rebuild your marriage in peace, without interference from me." Alina looked at him. She looked at the man who had forged her signature, who had named his son's former lover as the inheritor of her estate in the event of her death, who had filed a separation notice in Roman's name without Roman's knowledge, who had sent men with guns through the windows of her grandmother's restaurant while she was on the floor in the broken glass with her hand around her unborn daughter. She looked at him sitting in the chair with his coat still buttoned and his hands in his lap, and his voice completely level, offering her the thing he had tried to take from her, as though the taking had never happened. "No," she said. He tilted his head slightly. "Alina, you sent men through those windows," she said. "My daughter was in this room. That was... Don't." Her voice was very quiet. "Don't tell me what that was. I was on the floor. I know what that was." She held his gaze. "The offer is no. All of it is no. The release, the withdrawal, The piece. She leaned forward slightly. What you built, I'm going to take apart. Not because I'm angry, because it's mine, and you put your hands on it. Vittorio looked at her for a long moment. She watched him work through the remaining options. She could see it, the rapid calculation, the assessment of the room, the exits, the absence of Roman, the boarded windows. He reached inside his coat. Torres came through the kitchen door. Hands where I can see them, Torres said. 2 of her people came from the hallway on the other side. 2 more from the far entrance. All 4 moving with the practiced efficiency of people who have been in position for 90 minutes and are very ready. Vittorio went completely still. His hand, still inside his coat, held nothing. He brought it out slowly, empty. He set both hands flat on his knees. He looked at Alina. You brought federal agents, he said. You brought men with guns last time, she said. This seemed more appropriate. He looked at her for a long moment. And then, very slowly, something shifted in his expression. Not defeat, not yet, but the first crack of it. The specific moment when a man who has been certain of his own power for 50 years comes face to face with evidence that he miscalculated something fundamental. He had miscalculated Alina Moretti. He had looked at a pregnant woman in her grandmother's restaurant and seen something manageable. He had been wrong about that from the beginning. Torres was behind him now. Vittorio Vescari, I have a warrant for your arrest on charges including fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit financial crimes, and conspiracy to commit... The door from the street opened. Not Torres's people. Not Roman security. Celeste Armano walked through the door of the restaurant in the specific posture of a person who has made a decision and is committed to the physical fact of it. She had changed out of the clothes from last night. She was carrying nothing. She looked at Vittorio Vescari, sitting in the chair with federal agents around him, and her face did something complicated. Guilt and relief, and the particular expression of a person arriving at something that is too late to be called a rescue, but is still better than not arriving. Vittorio looked at her. Celeste, he said. She looked at him steadily. I already gave my statement, she said. The sound Vittorio Vescari made was not a word. It was the compressed, involuntary sound of a man who has just understood the full scope of what has happened to him, what has been methodically assembled around him while he was still operating on his original plan. What a woman he had dismissed as manageable had built in the space of one night while wearing an anniversary dress and holding a trust document her grandmother had written for exactly this kind of man. Torres finished the arrest language. Alina sat in her chair and watched it happen. Her back hurt. Her knees hurt. Her daughter was awake and moving, pressing against her ribs in the rolling, insistent way that meant she had run out of patience with being still, and Alina put her hand on her stomach under the table where no one could see it and held it there. The room was full of controlled, precise activity, documents being produced, Vittorio's attorney being contacted, Torres speaking into her radio, Celeste standing near the wall being spoken to by one of Torres's team. In the middle of all of it, the front door opened one more time. Roman. She had not told him to come. She had told him explicitly not to come. He stood in the doorway of the restaurant and looked at his father in the chair with his hands being guided behind his back, and something moved through his face that she watched without being able to name. Grief was in it, and anger, and something that might have been relief and might have been the opposite. Vittorio looked at his son. Roman looked at his father. Neither of them said anything. Then Vittorio looked away first. Roman came across the room. He stopped a few feet from Alina's chair. She looked up at him. He was pale and there was a muscle working in his jaw that he was trying to control, the involuntary physical betrayal of a man who is managing something enormous. I told you not to come, she said. I know, he said. Why did you? He looked at her. Just looked at her. In the way he had looked at her in the wedding photograph she had spent 3 weeks trying to find, the one where he was looking at her instead of the camera, before he learned to control that too. Because I needed to see it, he said quietly. What you did. I needed to be here when it finished. Alina looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked away. She looked at the room around her, the boarded windows, the righted table, the chair where Vittorio Vescari had sat and offered her peace in exchange for silence, the kitchen door where Torres had come through with her people, the entrance where Celeste had walked in and said the 4 words that had ended it, her grandmother's restaurant. Her grandmother's floors and walls, and the kitchen where the braised short rib had been prepared earlier in the week for an anniversary dinner that had never happened. Alina sat in the chair and felt the full weight of the last 24 hours settle into her body all at once. The exhaustion, the physical ache, the strange deflation that comes after sustained extremity when the thing you were braced for is finally, irrevocably over. Not fully over. There would be courts, there would be proceedings, there would be months of this, of testimony and documentation, and the slow, institutional grinding of consequences. But Vittorio Vescari was in handcuffs in her grandmother's restaurant, and the properties were frozen, and the evidence was filed, and Celeste Armano had walked through the door and said, "I already gave my statement," and the plan that had been built to remove Alina Moretti from her own life had been dismantled by Alina Moretti in the space of one night with her grandmother's letter in her pocket, and her daughter pressing against her ribs and her hands, the whole time, the hands that had been steady the whole time. She looked at them now, in her lap, and they were finally shaking. Not from fear, not from cold, from the particular release of a body that has been held under extreme tension for a sustained period and has just been told it can stop. Like a fist unclenching after hours of gripping something that mattered. The trembling was involuntary and she didn't try to stop it. She just looked at her hands and let them shake and breathed. Torres was moving through the room with the efficient choreography of someone managing multiple channels simultaneously. Radio, phone, the quiet directives to her team. Two of her people had Vittorio by the arms, not roughly, with the impersonal professionalism of federal agents who are not making a point but simply doing a job. Vittorio walked with them without resistance. He was past resistance. Alina watched him cross the dining room floor toward the door, and she waited for herself to feel something specific, triumph, or satisfaction, or the clean relief of a concluded thing. And what she felt instead was tired. Tired in a way that went past physical. The bone-deep weariness of someone who has spent a night and a morning being more than she was and is now, in the specific quiet that follows emergency. Just a woman in her grandmother's restaurant with her hands shaking in her lap. At the door, Vittorio stopped. Torres's people stopped with him. Not because he resisted, because he turned his head and looked back at her. "I underestimated you," he said. Alina looked at him across the room. "Yes." "Roman's mother was like you," he said. "Stubborn in the same way, quiet about it." He paused. "I underestimated her too." She didn't answer that. There was nothing in it that required her answer. He had said it to do something, to establish a connection, to create a moment of humanity, to be remembered as a man who could recognize his mistakes rather than simply a man who made them. She understood the maneuver, and she didn't take it. She watched him go. The door closed. The room was quieter without him in it, the way rooms are quieter after a specific kind of presence leaves. Not louder before, but differently weighted. Alina exhaled slowly and put both hands flat on her knees and pushed herself to standing. Her body registered every complaint in sequence, knees, lower back, the stiffness in her shoulders from the hours of sustained tension, the dull ache behind her eyes from a night without sleep. She stood up through all of it and straightened. Torres came over. She had her jacket pushed back and her radio clipped in the particular expression of a woman who has just watched something she's been building toward for 3 years reach its conclusion and is not yet ready to call it done. "We'll need you at the federal building tomorrow morning," she said. "Formal recorded statement. Your attorney will be present." She paused. "You should also know the power of attorney filing your father-in-law used for the separation notice has been flagged. Your attorney is already moving to have it voided on the grounds of abuse of fiduciary authority. It'll take a few weeks, but it will be voided." "The separation isn't real," Alina said, not asking. "It was filed without Roman Vescari's knowledge or consent. That's a documentable fact. The filing will be challenged, and it will lose." Torres looked at her steadily. "Your marriage is legally intact. What you do with that is your business." Alina nodded. "Thank you." Torres extended her hand. Alina shook it. The hand of a woman who had come through a kitchen door at 6 in the morning into her grandmother's dining room and done exactly what she said she would do. "Go home," Torres said, "or wherever home is right now, rest. You have about 10 years of paperwork ahead of you, but tonight you've earned a few hours off." Torres went back to her team. Alina stood in the middle of the dining room and looked around at what remained. The plywood on the windows, the righted table, the two chairs, the velvet box, which she realized with a start was still on the floor near the wall where it had ended up after the shooting. She had forgotten about it in the movement of everything since, and now she crossed the room and picked it up. She opened it. The ultrasound photograph was still inside, a little bent at the corner from hitting the floor, but intact. And beneath it, the folded note. Her own handwriting. Our greatest chapter is almost here. She stood with the velvet box in both hands and looked at those words she had written 4 days ago at the kitchen table while Roman was in the next room. She thought about this woman who had written them. Not a different woman. Herself. Exactly herself. But in a version of the morning that had not yet broken. She folded the note back around the photograph. She closed the box. She put it in her coat pocket beside her grandmother's letter. Alina. Roman. He was standing near the kitchen door, where he'd been for the last 20 minutes, not approaching, not leaving, occupying the specific space of a man who understands that he does not have the right to take up more room than he's been offered. She looked at him. He looked back. He was wearing the same clothes from last night. He had not gone home. She didn't know if he had a home to go to that felt like anything right now, and she found, with some surprise, that she could hold both things at once. The anger, still present, solid and real, and something that was not forgiveness but was adjacent to genuine concern. The coexistence of those two things felt like the most accurate description of where she actually was. She walked toward him. She stopped a few feet away. "Your father is in federal custody," she said. "I know. The properties are frozen. The injunction holds. The forgery is documented and will be prosecuted." She paused. Celeste gave her full statement. "She's being processed for a cooperation agreement." He nodded. "Your organization..." She stopped. "What's left of it?" "Very little," he said quietly. "When my father's lieutenants find out what's happened, most of them are already aware something went wrong tonight. The ones who are loyal to him will scatter. The ones who were waiting to see which direction the wind went will make their own calculations." He looked at the boarded windows. "It's over. What my father built. It doesn't survive this. What do you do now?" He looked at her. "What do I do now?" He repeated it quietly, not as a question but as a thing he was holding up to the light to examine. "I don't know yet. I have money that is clean, mine, separate from my father's operations, from before I fully understood what I was part of. I have..." He stopped. "I have a daughter I haven't met yet, and a wife who hasn't decided what she is to me." Alina looked at him for a long moment. "I'm not deciding anything tonight," she said. "I know. I'm going back to my mother's apartment. I'm going to sleep for 8 hours. I have a federal statement tomorrow morning and probably 6 months of legal proceedings after that." She paused. "I'm not deciding anything about us while all of that is also happening." "That's fair," he said. "It's not about fair," she said. "It's about the fact that I haven't slept and I've been shot at, and I'm 8 months pregnant and I don't have the capacity to also sort out what my marriage means right now." She held his gaze. "That doesn't mean I've made a decision. It means I haven't." Something in his expression shifted. Not hope exactly. He was too honest with himself for hope right now. But the absence of certainty in a specific direction, which was more than he had any right to ask for tonight. "Can I drive you to your mother's?" he asked. "No," she said. "I have her car." She picked up her coat from the chair. She was already wearing her coat. She put it on more firmly, adjusting the collar, checking the pocket for the envelope out of reflex. Still there. Both things still there. She walked toward the door. She stopped. She turned back one more time and looked at the restaurant, the room where she had grown up spending Sundays, where her grandmother had taught her how to fold napkins and how to talk to difficult customers and how to know when a sauce needed more time. The room with the plywood on the windows and the table she had set for an anniversary dinner that had become something else entirely. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she turned around and walked out. The months that followed were long in the specific way that legal proceedings are long. Not dramatic, not sustained at the pitch of that night, but grinding and detailed and exhausting in their own quieter way. Vittorio Vescari was formally charged on 11 counts, including conspiracy to commit financial crimes, fraud, forgery, and after further investigation into the gunshots at the restaurant, conspiracy to commit assault. His attorneys were expensive and thorough and managed to push the first hearing back twice. They did not manage to make the evidence go away because the evidence was very thorough and had been assembled by a woman who understood, from the moment she sat in her grandmother's office with a trust document in her lap, that she needed to make it airtight before anyone knew she had it. Alina gave her formal statement the morning after. She sat across from Torres and a second federal investigator and a court reporter and spoke for 3 hours in the flat, precise way she had discovered she was capable of under pressure. Not emotionally detached, but controlled, the emotions present and real and kept in their correct lane while the facts moved through the center of the lane beside them. She did not cry during the statement. She cried afterward, briefly, in the bathroom on the 4th floor of the federal building, with her forehead against the cool tile wall and her hand on her stomach. And then she washed her face and went back out and signed everything that required her signature. 3 weeks after the arrest, Celeste Armano's cooperation agreement was finalized. She testified before a grand jury for 2 days. Alina did not attend those proceedings. She did not need to. Celeste's testimony was Donna's domain and Torres's domain, and Alina had provided everything she had to provide. What Celeste did with her own reckoning was Celeste's to carry. She thought about Celeste sometimes, not with warmth, not with anything resolved, but with the complicated, impure acknowledgement that people do terrible things for reasons that don't make the things less terrible and don't make the people less human. She had advocated for Celeste's protection not because she forgave her, but because it was the most efficient path, and because she was not in the business of cruelty for its own sake. That distinction mattered to her. She kept it. Dana Reyes sent her flowers when the grand jury returned its indictment. A small arrangement, practical woman, practical gesture, with a note that said simply, 3 years of work, worth everyone. Alina kept the note. She put it in the drawer of her grandmother's desk, next to the envelope with the trust document and the letter, and she left them there together. She gave birth on a Tuesday morning in late November. 7 hours of labor. 7 hours of her mother in the room the entire time, sitting in the chair by the window for the first 4 hours and standing at her side for the last 3, holding her hand with the same compressed, efficient grip she had used at the kitchen table. 3 seconds. Steady, then release. The midwife Alina had been seen for 6 months was there, calm and competent and unremarkable in the best possible way, which was all Alina had ever wanted from anyone present for the birth of her daughter. She was born at 11:42 in the morning. 7 pounds, 2 ounces. A head of dark hair that immediately suggested Roman and a set of lungs that suggested she was not going to be quiet about anything, which Alina took as a very positive sign. They put her on Alina's chest and she stopped crying immediately. She just looked up. Dark eyes, not yet settled into their permanent color, but dark, looking at the face above her with the unfocused, serious attention of someone who has just arrived somewhere and is taking inventory. Alina looked back at her daughter. She did not speak for a long moment. There were things she could have said, things she had imagined saying in the months of pregnancy when she'd thought about this moment, but all of them dissolved in the actual fact of it, which was simpler and more enormous than any prepared language could reach. She just held her. Her mother was crying. Alina noticed that peripherally. Her mother, who cried almost never, who had held Alina's hand with 3 seconds of pressure and then released, was standing by the window with her hand over her mouth. And when Alina caught her eye, she laughed a little through whatever was happening in her chest, and Rosa Moretti laughed back and didn't bother to wipe her face. Roman was in the waiting room. She had told him he could be there, in the hospital, in the waiting room, available. She had not told him he could be in the room. She had thought about it for 3 weeks and decided she needed that room to be hers. That birth belonged to Alina and her daughter and her mother and the midwife. Whatever Roman was going to be, that particular threshold was not his to cross yet. He had accepted that without argument, which was, she had found in the months since the arrest, what he largely did. He had moved out of their apartment 2 weeks after the night at the restaurant. His choice, stated simply and without drama. He thought she needed the space, and he was going to give it to her. He had taken almost nothing. He sent her a check every 2 weeks that was more than enough, and that she put in a separate account she had opened specifically so that her finances and his remained distinctly separate until she had decided what she was deciding. He called twice a week. Sometimes she answered, sometimes she didn't. When she answered, they talked about the legal proceedings, about the baby's progress, about practical things. Sometimes, rarely, they talked about other things. A movie she'd watched that he'd also seen, something her mother had said, the way the restaurant was coming back together after the window repair. Those conversations were harder to categorize, and she had stopped trying to categorize them. She sent him a text from the delivery room 40 minutes after the birth. Just 3 words. "She's here. Safe." He responded in under a minute. "Thank you for telling me." That was all. She had expected more and was moved, in a way she didn't fully examine, by the fact that he understood that more was not what the moment called for. She named her daughter Lucia. Her mother didn't say anything when she heard it. She just looked at Alina with an expression that had several layers, and then she nodded once, slowly, the nod of someone who recognizes the right choice and doesn't need to make a speech about it. Roman came to the hospital the following afternoon, during the visiting window Alina had established. She had told him when and how long and what the parameters were, and he had shown up exactly on time with nothing in his hands because she had told him not to bring anything, and he was learning, with some difficulty but genuine effort, to take instructions. She was sitting up in the hospital bed when he came in. Lucia was in the bassinet beside her, asleep with the total commitment of a newborn to whom wakefulness and sleep are both just different forms of extreme. Roman stopped just inside the door and looked at the bassinet. He looked at his daughter for the first time. Alina watched him. She watched a man who ran a criminal empire for 15 years, who had stood in rooms with violence in them without flinching, who had managed his own father's attempts to destroy his wife with the controlled calculation of a strategist. She watched that man stand inside a hospital room door and look at a sleeping infant and completely come apart. Not dramatically. There was nothing dramatic about it. He didn't make a sound. He put one hand over his mouth and his eyes filled, and he stood there with his whole face doing something it had never done in the 2.5 years she had known him, and she understood that whatever Roman Viscari had been protecting himself from feeling for most of his life had just looked up at him from a bassinet with dark hair and 7 pounds of absolute indifference. "You can come closer," she said. He crossed the room slowly. He stopped at the edge of the bassinet and looked down. Lucia slept. Roman stood over his daughter for a long time without speaking. Then very carefully, with the tentativeness of someone who is afraid of breaking something for the first time in their adult life, he reached down and put one finger against her hand. Her fingers, reflexively, curled around it. Roman let out a breath that had been held since the night at the restaurant. Alina watched him and felt the thing in her chest that she had been trying to keep correctly categorized threaten its category. She pressed her lips together and looked at her daughter's face instead. "She looks like you," Roman said. His voice was rough. "She looks like my grandmother." "Yes," he said. "Yes, that too." He stood there for another minute. Then he straightened up and looked at Alina, and his face had the stripped, unprotected quality that she had seen only a few times. At the restaurant the night of the anniversary, in the empty warehouse when he told her the things he should have told her months before. "Alina," he said. "Don't," she said gently. "I just need to say, Roman, I know what you need to say. I've been thinking about what you need to say for 3 months. She looked at him steadily. "I'm not ready to hear it yet. That's not the same as saying I'll never be ready. It means not today." He looked at her for a moment, then he nodded. "Okay," he said. "You can visit her," Alina said. "Regularly. I'll make a schedule that works for both of us. She's going to know her father." She paused. "What kind of father you are is up to you. I can't tell you how to do that part." "I know. And whatever you're building now, whatever comes next for you, it has to be clean. Not for me, for her." She looked at Lucia. "She's a Moretti. She inherits a restaurant and 4 buildings and a trust document her great-grandmother wrote specifically to protect her before she was born. She's going to grow up knowing where she comes from." Alina looked back at Roman. "What she knows about where you come from, that's on you to build." Roman was quiet for a moment. "I know," he said again. He looked down at Lucia one more time. He didn't touch her again. He just looked, the way people look at something they're trying to memorize because they're not sure how much access they'll have to it. Then he straightened. He looked at Alina. "Thank you," he said, "for letting me be here." She didn't answer. He walked to the door. He stopped. "The restaurant," he said, without turning around. "When you reopen, I'll keep my people away from it permanently. Whatever arrangement you want. Security, you hire yourself. No connection to anyone I know. Whatever you need. I'll stay out of it. I know you will, she said. He went out. She listened to his footsteps in the hallway, the specific weight of them that she had memorized in 2 years of sharing a home, receding down the corridor and then gone. She sat in the hospital bed and looked at her daughter sleeping in the bassinet and breathed. In, out. The restaurant reopened in the spring. Not immediately. Alina spent 4 months on it, the window repairs, which had been cosmetic but felt symbolic and needed to be done correctly. And then the broader repairs she had been wanting to make for 2 years, but had kept deferring because she'd been pregnant, and then because she'd been occupied with surviving what had been built around her. She did the work herself where she could, and hired people where she couldn't, and she was on site for almost every decision, with Lucia in a carrier strapped to her chest for the first 2 months, and then in a bouncy seat on the office floor while Alina reviewed invoices and fabric samples and paint choices. Her mother came every Tuesday and Friday. She would arrive at 9 in the morning, take Lucia with the efficiency of a woman who raised a child largely alone and has not forgotten how, and liberate Alina to do whatever required 2 unencumbered hands, and she would stay until 3. She did not comment on the choices Alina made for the restaurant. She made suggestions occasionally, brief and specific, and let Alina take or leave them. The menu stayed the same. Alina had thought about changing it and had decided against it. The menu was her grandmother's, and there was nothing wrong with it, and there was no reason to fix what was already right. She hired a new chef, a young woman named Petra, who had worked her way through 2 of the best kitchens in the city and wanted something that felt more like a home and less like a competition. She had the right hands. Alina knew within the first hour of the trial service. She rehired the old staff who were available. Most of them were. They came back with the loyalty of people who had worked somewhere long enough that the place had become part of their identity. And Alina shook each of their hands on the first day back and did not make a speech about what had happened because they knew and she knew, and the handshake said everything. 2 weeks before the reopening, Dana Reyes called. Vittorio's trial date has been set, she said. September. The attorneys have run out of ways to delay. A pause. I want you to be prepared. You'll be called as a witness. I know. The press is going to be covering it extensively. The financial conspiracy angle alone is significant, but the family element, Dana stopped. It's going to be a lot of attention directed at you personally. I know that too. How are you doing with that? Alina was standing in the restaurant's kitchen at the time, looking at a new set of copper pots that Petra had requested and that she had approved because they were the same kind her grandmother had used. I'm doing fine with it, she said. I was a Moretti before I was a Viscari. The attention will find the right name eventually. A pause. Then Dana said, You're reverting your name? I'm giving my daughter my name, Alina said. What I do with mine, I haven't decided yet. She hadn't. She was still in the specific holding pattern of someone who has survived a significant thing and is waiting for the sediment to settle before making decisions about the permanent arrangement of the riverbed. Some days she was certain the marriage was over. Some days she was less certain. She had decided to allow herself the uncertainty without forcing it into resolution, which was harder than either conclusion, but more honest than both. Roman had been what he said he would be. He showed up for his scheduled visits, Tuesdays and Saturday mornings, exactly on time, consistently, without drama. He held Lucia with the careful, slowly growing confidence of a man learning something entirely new about himself through a 7-pound person who had no patience for his learning curve. He texted Alina about Lucia, small things, observations, a photograph he took of her expression during a visit, a question about whether she was sleeping better. He did not text about anything else unless she initiated it. He was building something. She could see it in the margins of the visits, a quieter version of himself, something that didn't have the organization's weight behind it, something that was trying to establish what he was made of without the infrastructure that had always defined him. She didn't know yet if what he was building was enough. She wasn't sure she would know for a while. She thought about what he'd said at the restaurant the night of the anniversary. I chose you. And what she'd answered, you chose me after betraying me. There's a difference. Both things were still true. Both things would always be true. The question she hadn't answered, that she didn't have the answer to yet, was whether a person could hold both truths and still make a life. Not a restored life. Not the one she'd had before. A different one. Informed by what had happened, built on different ground. She didn't know. She left the question open and went back to work. The reopening was a Thursday evening in late April. She had not done advertising. She had sent handwritten notes to the regulars whose contact information was in her grandmother's files, which she had found in the third drawer of the old desk, which apparently Lucia Moretti Sr. had maintained with the same precision she maintained everything else. Those notes had apparently done what they needed to do, because by 6:30, the restaurant was full. Alina moved through the room the way her grandmother had taught her. Not hovering, not performing, but present, genuinely tracking whether people had what they needed and whether Petra's food was landing the way it should. It was. The braised short rib had been on the menu since her grandmother put it there, and it remained, empirically, exactly right. Her mother was at a corner table with an old friend, eating with the uncomplicated enjoyment of a woman who did not need to be working the room to be at the center of it. Lucia was upstairs in the apartment above the restaurant, a space Alina had reclaimed and renovated as her own, moving out of the apartment she had shared with Roman, establishing herself in the building that had always belonged to her family. A trusted sitter was with Lucia, a woman Alina had vetted with the same thoroughness she now applied to everything. At 8:15, during the lull between the first and second seating, Alina went back to the private dining room. It was back to what it had always been. Restored, repainted, the window that had been shot out replaced with new glass that let in the streetlight in the same particular way the old one had. She had hung new photographs. Not from her marriage. From the restaurant's history. Her grandmother in the kitchen in 1987, the original menu framed in its handwritten form, a photograph of the building before the current signage, a photograph of the street outside taken sometime in the 1970s that she had found in a box and had enlarged and framed because it was beautiful and because it connected the room to the length of time it had been standing. On the wall between two of the photographs, she had hung one other thing, the ultrasound image, framed simply, without a caption, without explanation. Just the small gray image of her daughter's face in its earliest form, curled and complete, the beginning of a person who was currently asleep upstairs with her whole life ahead of her. Beside it, on a small card, she had written the same words she had written 4 days before the anniversary. In the handwriting she had spent 20 minutes perfecting because her hands kept shaking with happiness. Our greatest chapter is almost here. She had decided to keep the words. Not for Roman, not as a statement about their marriage or its ruins, but because when she had written them, she had been thinking about Lucia, about the person coming, about the chapter of her life that a child represents. And that meaning had not been invalidated by what happened after. The words were still true. The chapter had arrived. It was here, sleeping upstairs, 7 pounds of dark hair, and her great-grandmother's eyes. She stood in the private dining room and looked at the ultrasound photograph on the wall and felt the restaurant around her, the sounds of it, the low conversation from the dining room, the percussion of Petra's kitchen, the particular warmth of a full room in the evening. And she felt for the first time since the morning of the anniversary something that was not the managed functioning of a person under pressure, but actual peace. Not complete, not without its complications, but real, the way things are real when they've been arrived at rather than assumed. The door opened behind her. She knew the footsteps. Roman stood in the doorway of the private dining room, and she turned to look at him. He was not on the schedule. Tuesday was the schedule. This was a Thursday. "You weren't supposed to come tonight," she said. "I know." He looked around the room, at the photographs, at the new window, at the framed ultrasound on the wall. He stood very still looking at it for a moment. Then he looked at the card beside it. He read the words. She watched him read them and watched his face do something quiet and internal that he didn't try to prevent. "I heard it was the reopening," he said. "Word travels. I wanted—" He stopped. He looked at her. "I don't have a good reason. I just wanted to be here. I should have called." He looked at the door. "I can go." She looked at him standing in the doorway of her grandmother's restaurant, in the room where she had built an anniversary surprise, and where she had taken it apart, and where she had sat on the floor during a shooting, and where she had faced his father with federal agents through a kitchen door. She looked at the man who had held his body over hers on that floor, and who had driven across the city at 2 a.m. because she'd asked him to do something that cost him everything, and who had stood in a hospital room with one finger outstretched until their daughter curled her hand around it. She looked at him for a long time. "The braised short rib is on tonight," she said finally. He was very still. Petra made from my grandmother's recipe. She got it right. Alina looked at the room. There's a table in the main dining room, corner. It'll be open in about 10 minutes. Roman looked at her. She could see him parsing what she was saying and what she wasn't. She was not saying come back. She was not saying forgiven. She was not saying the distance between them had closed or would close, or that the long, complicated reckoning that still lay ahead of them had been resolved by a spring evening and a reopening. She was saying, there is a table, there is food. You can sit here and eat it, and be in this place that is mine, and that is what tonight is, and nothing more than that. And if you can take that without needing it to mean something larger, then you can stay. He understood. She could see him understand it. Okay, he said quietly. She nodded. She walked past him toward the main dining room, back into the sound and warmth of a restaurant full of people who were eating well and talking to each other and having an ordinary evening in a place that had been her grandmother's and was now hers. She picked up a menu from the host stand out of habit and set it back down because Petra's menu was in her head by now. Every item, every variation, the way she knew the layout of every room and the weight of every door. She moved through this dining room and checked on tables and spoke to the people she knew, which was most of them. And she did not look back at the door to the private dining room to see if Roman had come out yet. She didn't need to. She knew the sound of his footsteps. She would hear him when he came through. Later, much later, after the last table had finished and Petra's kitchen had gone quiet, and the staff had cleaned and gone home, and her mother had kissed her cheek and left, and the restaurant was hers alone. Alina locked the front door and turned off the lights in the main dining room and stood for a moment in the dark. The restaurant breathed around her the way old buildings breathe, settling sounds. The faint creak of wood adjusting to the cooled evening air, the hum of the refrigeration units in the kitchen. She had stood in this dark many times as a child, waiting while her grandmother finished something in the back, and the dark had never frightened her here. It was familiar dark, known dark. She went upstairs. The sitter was on the couch with a book. Lucia was asleep in the small room Alina had made into a nursery. Pale yellow walls, her grandmother's old rocking chair refinished, and in the corner, a mobile above the crib that made no sound but moved slowly in the draft from the heating vent. Alina paid the sitter and saw her out and locked the door and stood in the quiet apartment above the restaurant. She went to the nursery doorway. Lucia was on her back, arms flung wide in the total abandon of infant sleep, her face perfectly still. She breathed visibly, her small chest rising and falling with a regularity that Alina tracked automatically now, the way her own breathing had become automatic. She stood in the doorway and looked at her daughter for a long time. She thought about her grandmother's letter, the line she had come back to most often in the months since. Fear is a luxury. Work is what remains. She had tested that proposition extensively and found it accurate. She had been afraid, genuinely and completely afraid, in the private dining room on the floor with glass around her and her daughter still inside her and the sounds of a city that didn't know she existed. Fear had moved through her like a current, and she had let it and had kept working anyway, and the work had been enough. It was not a lesson she had wanted, it was the lesson she had. She thought about Roman at the corner table tonight, eating the braised short rib with the quiet concentration of a man who knows he is on borrowed time and is not going to waste it. She had not sat with him, she had been working. But she had passed the table twice, and the second time he had looked up, and their eyes had met with the particular weight of two people who have been through something together that cannot be compressed into any available language. And she had looked at him for one moment that was not managed or categorized, and then she had moved on. She didn't know what would happen with Roman. She had been trying to know, and she had decided to stop trying. The future of that particular question would be determined by what both of them did over a long period of time, and she had learned, the hard way, the only way that really teaches anything, that the future can't be secured by a plan. Her grandmother had planned. Her grandmother had written a trust document to protect assets against men who might come for them. The plan had worked because the plan was built on reality rather than wishful thinking, on accurate assessment of human nature rather than optimistic revision of it. She would extend the same approach to whatever came next. She would see what Roman built. She would watch what he did rather than listen to what he said, because she had learned to be fluent now in the difference between the two. She would raise her daughter in this building, in this city, in this restaurant, and she would teach her what her grandmother had taught her, about work and stubbornness, And the particular kind of courage that doesn't look like courage because it looks too much like ordinary persistence. And she would keep the restaurant open every day, with Lucia Moretti's menu on the tables and Petra's hands in the kitchen and the 4 buildings intact under the secondary trust and the framed ultrasound on the wall of the private dining room, because that photograph was hers, and it always had been. She went to the rocking chair and sat down. She didn't wake Lucia. She just sat in the dim room with her sleeping daughter and the mobile turning slowly in the draft and the sounds of the building around her, and let the evening settle into what it actually was. Not a victory in any clean sense, not a resolution in the way stories resolve, but something more functional and more true than either. A day survived. A room reclaimed. A restaurant filled with people eating food that her grandmother invented, and that would be here after both of them were gone. A chapter that had, in fact, arrived. She leaned her head back against the chair and felt the quiet of the building hold her, the way it had always held her, the way that a place built by someone who loved you holds you even after they're gone. In the structure of it, in the specific weight of the doors and the particular creak of the floors, in all the durable evidence of a life that was lived here with intention and care and a stubborn refusal to let go of what it had earned. Alina Moretti closed her eyes. She did not look back.